I see we're live.
Yes, we are live. I am doing something that I have to do, which is delaying us for just a moment.
Okay.
But, uh, okay, I have to get it right because if I don't, things won't work for me.
Okay.
But there it goes.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay, sorry to delay this.
That's fine. Okay, Jeffrey Denton is here. Hello, Jeffrey.
Hiya, Jeff. How are you? Okay, so this is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And I'm here with my good friend Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends.
I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here too, and I'm happy you're here. And what I just did is I promoted this post.
Oh, very good.
So
Yeah, you've got a very active show tonight, very busy.
yes, I do.
And I see Steve Wolfbrandt is here.
Hey, Steve Wolfbrand, how are you? Good to see you. And Jeff and Wayne Santelban is here too. It's good to see you, Wayne. And there are a number of others who we hear as well who we can't really see yet, but hopefully we will see soon. Our topics for tonight are CIA bias, Islamic extremism, and its effect in Syria, and also the bellicosity of one of the generals of the U.S. who is being utterly ridiculous.
Mm.
All these topics are covered in some posts, by Larry Johnson. And then we have a little altercation going on between Jeff Sachs and Donald Trump. And we cover the Jeff Sachs side of the altercation here. I,
Which is good.
I understand there are Trump responses, but I'm not going to cover those here tonight.
No, 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 no. We
Okay,
don't need to get into that.
then we also have the topic of the reality or lack of it of the weapons that are flowing to Ukraine. And that's an interview between George Galloway and Scott Ritter, which is hilarious, absolutely hilarious. And then we have a longer, is it longer? Yeah, I think it's longer. Scott Ritter video with Professor Glenn Deason, doing the interviewing, and that's very very entertaining also, and with very stuff. So those are our topics here for tonight, and
Okay.
we will get right into them. Well, first what we're going to do is share on Facebook.
Yes, I'm sharing the show out and
Okay, thank you. And I will now also share the show out,
okay.
and that's going to take a minute.
Yes. Both my accounts on Facebook I did that and
Well,
gotta go over to X. Gotta go over to X now and share it.
okay, thank you.
To remember all the different places to go.
Yeah, this is the one.
Okay.
We already got a number of people on Facebook.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
Okay.
looks like we're doing well there. And let's get right into the blog posts. We have a series of 3 blog posts from Larry
Okay.
Johnson covering the first 3 of our topics. And the first one deals with the CIA and CIA bias.
Oh, I just want to say hello to Wayne. Wayne's here. Wayne Sandelbaum.
Yeah, that's fine. I said hello to him,
Okay.
I think, a little earlier, but that's all right. That's fine. Anyway, I'll get started with that one. It was written by Larry Johnson on the 19th of July, 2025. And the title is the CIA initiated an intelligence and terrorist war on Russia based on a lie. Well, what a surprise. But anyway, here is Biden's CIA director, Bill Burns. His face wasn't really familiar to me before, so I'm glad there's this picture here. Foreign Policy, that's a magazine, published an article last week by uh, um, by Timothy Weiner, author of Legacy of Ashes, with the title "When the Threat is Inside the White House: What CIA Insiders Make of the MAGA Moles and Toadies Now in Charge of U.S. National Security." The moles and the toadies, very good. While the intent of the article is to paint Trump and his team as a bunch of Russian toadies, Weiner unwittingly paints a picture of the CIA's leadership as biased operators with no understanding of Russia. They still think they are engaging a communist authoritarian state. Here is the opening paragraph. And Larry quotes this, of course. "If our nation spies are the infantry of our um, um, ideology, as John le Carré once observed, Tom Sylvester is an unknown soldier who became a four-star general. 2 years ago, he was named the CIA's Deputy Director of Operations, in charge of thousands of officers conducting espionage, covert action, and paramilitary um, operations. He won the job by virtue of his role in stealing Russia's war plans for Ukraine, warning the world about the coming invasion, and providing steadfast support uh, to Kyiv's intelligence and military services. Weiner credits Sylvester with, quote, stealing Russia's war plans for Ukraine, but completely ignores the role the CIA played in provoking Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The entire narrative surrounding Sylvester's actions is constructed around the premise that Russia is a bad, evil actor, and that its actions have nothing to do with Western provocations, especially the expansion of NATO to the east. The next, quote, highlight, unquote, from Weiner's piece provides an excellent example of the CIA's bias and ignorance when it comes to Russia. In the summer of 2017, Sylvester received new marching orders from Thomas, Rakusan, the new chief of the clandestine service, whose identity remained state secret till after he retired. Rakusan had spied on Russia since before the end of the Cold War, operating throughout Central and Eastern parts of Europe. His hatred of the Russians was bred in the bone. His parents were Czech. He was 9 years old when Soviet troops crushed the Prague Spring Uprising in 1968. Rakusan saw Russian President Vladimir Putin's subversion of the presidential election on Trump's behalf as the espionage equivalent of 9/11. In retaliation, he aimed to penetrate the Kremlin, among the greatest aspirations of the CIA since its foundation, and a goal that was never achieved. Unquote. Hatred of Russians? It is one thing to despise the Soviet Union, which was governed by a communist ideology, but the quote, end of the Cold War, unquote, was marked by the peaceful overthrow of a communist government and the creation of a new Russian government that emphasized nationalism and Christianity. So, how is that a threat to the United States? Moreover, during the decade of the 1990s, the military of Russia was in disarray, and the society was ravaged by economic crisis, which included 2 periods of hyperinflation, widespread poverty among the Russian people, and a dramatic decline in life expectancy among uh, the men in Russia. I want to emphasize here that decline in life expectancy was a reflection of an extremely high rate of suicide that instituted itself among Russian men during the 1990s, because the unemployment rates were so high and the economy was in such a state of collapse that men had nothing to do, and in despair, they drank themselves to death. They couldn't afford the alcohol. So what they did is they distilled it themselves uh, from various kinds of resources that were very unhealthy, and a lot of them died from that. Okay, there were inside of a decade, the Russian population declined by 10 million people, and most of those were men. Going on with the article, this did not age well. Quote, Rakistan saw Russian President Vladimir Putin's subversion of the presidential election on Trump's behalf as the espionage equivalent of 9/11, unquote. Tulsi Gabbard's declassification of intelligence documents and emails from various members of the CIA and other intelligence officials on Friday shows that Rakistan either had his head up his ass or was part of the conspiracy. These are not my words, these are Larry Johnson's, or was part of the conspiracy to attack Donald Trump with a lie, or both. The memo carries the subject line, Intelligence Community Suppression of Intelligence, showing, quote, Russian and criminal actors did not impact, unquote, the 2016 presidential election via cyber attacks on infrastructure. I'm sure this caught um, Tim Weiner by surprise. Certainly takes the wind out of his sails as he tries to portray the CIA as a saintly, honest outfit being undermined by a president who's in the pocket of Putin. I want to remind everybody here that Larry Johnson is an ex-CIA officer, or at least a retired, CIA officer. Who's a member, of Veterans for Sane Intelligence, something like that is the name of the organization. It was founded by and headed up for a long time by Ray McGovern, a very good friend of Larry's. Anyway, the next couple of paragraphs from Weiner paint a picture of Western intelligence ramping up against Russia, but also exposes the impotence of the CIA with respect to human intelligence assets in Russia. Here's another quote from the report. By the summer of 2020, CIA officers were working in close liaison with the British, Dutch, Ukrainians, Poles, Czechs, Estonians, and many other services against the Russians. Quote, there was the strategic decision on how we would share intelligence, unquote, Sylvester said. Quote again, we used it as a mechanism of influence in and of itself to get governments to start cooperating with us, unquote. This hard-won trust, quote again, allowed them to open up taps of cooperation and intelligence that they had theretofore not shared with us, he added. The CIA and its foreign allies were cross-fertilizing intelligence, choreographing operations, and most importantly, recruiting Russian sources. The CIA had been able to, quote, push back against the Russian services, unquote, largely by, quote, working with liaison partners overseas to expose and disrupt Russian intelligence activities, unquote. And CIA Director William Burns told me last year, quote, and then what we tried to build on that starting in the spring of 2021 was the recruitment dimension of this, unquote, he said, and quote again, this was really, especially once the war drum started beating, a once-in-a-generation opportunity given the disaffection in some parts of the Russian elite and Russian society against Putin's against the regime. This quote jumped off the page for me, says Larry, largely by, quote, working with liaison partners overseas to expose and disrupt Russian intelligence activities, unquote. That is a polite way of saying the CIA had no assets of its own and was relying on foreign intelligence services, with the bulk of the information coming from Ukraine. And note the significance of the, quote, spring of 2021, unquote. Biden was newly installed as president, and the effort to go after Russia on a more intense basis was kicked into high gear. Burns' comment to Weiner is also quite instructive. It shows a mistaken belief on the part of the director of the CIA about the stability of the Russian government, i.e., given the disaffection in some parts of the Russian elite and Russian society, unquote, against Putin's the regime of Putin, and is an implicit admission, that the CIA had embarked on a program to ignite a new color revolution in Russia. This is not my opinion. Weiner's piece makes that clear in this paragraph, and Larry quotes again. Kiev's spy services, rebuilt by the CIA after Russia seized Crimea and other parts of eastern Ukraine in 2014, had become one of Washington's best sources of intelligence on the Russians. CIA was becoming the Ukrainians', quote, best defense against them. Quote again, it's probably one of the best investments that the CIA, the U.S. government, has made, unquote, Sylvester said. It had created, quote, the trust, the confidence, the ability in times of need to feel like you are in the trenches together, unquote. By the fall of 2021, the CIA had given the Ukrainians a graduate course in espionage and paramilitary operations, along with the ability to understand and utilize the steady stream of U.S. intelligence. Larry says, I will close with this amazing but not surprising revelation from Weiner. Revelation from Weiner. He describes Rakissan's fury in the aftermath of Trump's election and Rakissan's desperate, dangerous actions. Quote, the Russians manipulated our fucking elections, unquote, he told them. Quote, how do we make sure this never happens again, unquote? He didn't care if they didn't speak Russian or never set foot in Moscow. He ordered them to take their expertise in targeting and recruiting terrorists and turn it against Russian spies, diplomats, and oligarchs. Got that? Quote, recruit terrorists, unquote. I don't ever want to hear another damn word about the U.S. fighting a war on terrorism when we have an admission from the top operations officer in the CIA telling his boys and girls to recruit terrorists who will be used to attack uh, uh, Russia. I'm sure the Russians have read Mr. Weiner's piece and have taken notice of this fact. I suspect they already knew that. Based on Weiner's article, we now know the U.S. launched an intelligence war on Russia based completely on a lie. And the senior leaders of the CIA went along with it. In my view, the CIA ought to be dismantled and cast to the four winds. Who was the first to suggest that? I think it was John F. Kennedy. We need to start over with some people of actual intelligence. I think Larry's dead right about that. He's right on the money with this one. And this one is on the money. I mean, launching an intelligence war on nationalist and Christian Russia based on a lie that they interfered in the election of 2016. I mean, that is just awful.
Oh, it was.
The CIA wasn't serving the American people.
No.
It was undermining our political system and causing us to enter a war that should never have occurred. And the question arises, what intelligence wars has the CIA got us into now, and what lies are they based on? And
Mm-hmm.
I certainly agree with Larry's conclusion. This intelligence agency ought to be dismantled and cast to the four winds. And we do need to start over with some people of actual intelligence. I think the directorship of the CIA should be given to either Ray McGovern or Larry Johnson right now,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe Scott Ritter. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just amazing. Okay, now let us go to the second of these posts, excellent posts. Okay, Larry Johnson, and I will post that up, but I think it is your turn, D.
Yeah, we have some comments here. I see Evelina. Hello, Evelina.
Okay, you want to go over the comments first?
Okay.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, we have a bunch of hellos here, and
Okay, I will share the screen, but let's go to the comments.
okay.
Evelina says hi, tragic. After the hellos, Evelina says how tragic, and she says, okay, the 90s in Russia, very tough time for tiny Cuba as well. It was.
Mm-hmm.
It was because support for Cuba had been coming from the Soviet Union to help them to survive our sanctions, and suddenly, of course, it was withdrawn, and Cuba was alone. It was a very tough time for them. Very, very tough. Okay, we get to Larry's second piece then.
Okay, and I see here. Okay. Defining Islamic extremism and what it means for Syria. And this is dated 20 July 2025.
Yes.
The evolution of ISIS in Syria is in this picture here.
Yes, this is hilarious because the first cartoon, okay, is Al Shara, or Al Golani, if you want to call him that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there he is in full head chopper mode, and there he is in insurgent mode with an AK-15, and I don't know what the third cartoon is supposed to depict. What mode that is? Maybe it's army mode. But of course, the fourth mode, okay, is Al Shara as the president of Syria.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. On the bottom it says, okay, that's him as a radical jihadist from ISIS. And then as a moderate jihadist, Al Nusra, no longer a head chopper, but just someone who kills people with AK 47s. Is that cat an AK 47 or an AK 15 or an AR 15? I'm not sure. Uh, and then the cartoon with the gun is as HTS, the armed opposition. And then HTS says the woke party Islamic State in a suit.
And Trump at the time too was interesting when he met him. It was
Yeah,
like when he was saying, "Oh yeah, he's a really tough guy, and yeah, he's a very good-looking guy." He's like,
I know Trump. Trump receiving the head chopper,
yeah, he didn't really know what to say, but say, he's a tough guy.
and he's really good looking.
Yeah, what are you gonna say? Okay, let's start with this fact. The overwhelming majority of Muslims are not crazed, murderous fanatics. It is a meme the West uses to justify genocide against. In fact, we now have clear evidence in the person of Syria's new leader that the U.S. provided direct support to a terrorist group that descended from ISIS. U.S. Ambassador Jim Jeffrey described Syria's current leader, Mohammed al-Julani, who was the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham (HTSS), as necessary partners in the chaotic Syrian landscape, despite their extremist views to prevent worse. Yeah, we need to move this.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was distracted by something else.
Okay, to prevent worse outcomes like full Russian Iranian control or ISIS resurgence. Starting in 2017, the U.S. State Department listed HTS as one of the top 10 most active terrorist groups in the world, and the U.S. placed $10 million bounty on his head. Jeffrey, in a Frontline piece produced by PBS, said the following: "Look, he's Jelani, the least bad option of the various options on Idlib, which is one of the most important places in Syria, which is one of the most important places right now in the Middle East, when there is not the normal setup of nation states and of international norms and rules. You wind up with groups like this that do things you don't like, but in the here and now are the folks you have to deal with to avoid even worse things."
Okay,
Jeffrey and
at least they're making the judgment that they have to deal with such people
right,
in order to avoid, even worse things,
right,
which is highly debatable, because they can't possibly know that.
no.
Please go on.
Jeffrey admitted to indirect communications with HTS during the Trump administration, including receiving and sending messages via intermediaries. He confirmed, quote, "yes," to receiving messages from HTS, elaborating, quote, "basically, quote, we want to be friends. We're not terrorists. We are just fighting Assad," he explained in his response. "I encourage people to keep me informed as often as possible. That was my job. I received and sent messages to HTS." The United States has played a dangerous game, declaring Islamic-based terrorism as a threat to justify military intervention, while providing support, including funding, to several of those Sunni Salafists to carry out regime destabilizing operations throughout West Asia and the Caucasus region. This included support to the Chechen rebels in Russia, which launched a 10-year war starting in 1999.
Yeah, by the way, that war uh, was resolved very satisfactorily by the Russians.
Hmm.
And now the Chechens who were involved in that war, against Russia, and who lost a considerable number of people
Hmm.
in that war, are among the most loyal citizens of the Federation, of the Russian Federation, and
Hmm.
were instrumental in prosecuting the war, against the Ukrainians. Just a little footnote. Please go on.
I made the mistake in the past of equating Al Qaeda as a Salafist entity. With the benefit of hindsight, bin Laden's group, although motivated by their religion, was an anti imperialist movement directed at the United States. Al Qaeda's leaders, particularly Ayman al Zawahiri, publicly opposed many of ISIS's actions, leading to a formal split between the groups in 2014. The
That's
oppos-
interesting,
mm,
isn't it? Very
yes, this opposition stemmed from ideological, strategic, and tactical differences, with Al Qaeda criticizing ISIS for its extreme brutality, sectarian focus, illegitimate declaration of a caliphate, and attacks on fellow jihadists and civilians, which they viewed as counterproductive to the broader jihadist cause. That cause was erasing U.S. influence in West Asia. As a public service, particularly for U.S. citizens unfamiliar with Islam, I want to attempt to define three terms: Wahhabism, Salafism, and Takfiri.
yes.
I am sure there are Islamic scholars who may take issue with my attempt to clarify the meaning of these words. I apologize in advance for my errors, but these are so important nuances here that Americans must understand in order to not be blinded by hate and end up supporting self destructive policies and interventions, especially in West Asia.
So that's what the rest of this blog, okay, is about. Just getting some clarity,
Yes,
the different forms, okay, of so-called extremism.
Wahhabism is a strict puritanical reform movement within Sunni Islam founded in the 18th century by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, 1703 to 1792, in the Arabian Peninsula, particularly in what is now Saudi Arabia. It is a subset of Salafism, advocating a return to the practices of the Salaf al-Saleh, the pious predecessors of the first three generations of Muslims, emphasizing a literalist interpretation of the Quran and Sunni, Prophet Muhammad's teachings, and rejecting innovations, bid'ah, or practices deemed un-Islamic, such as saint veneration or certain Sufi rituals. Core tenets: Tawhid, monotheism. Central to Wahhabism is the absolute oneness of God, rejecting any form of shirk, polytheism, including shrine worship or intercession by saints. Rejection of bid'ah. Uh, Wahhabis condemn practices not explicitly supported by early Islamic texts, such as celebrating the Prophet's birthday or elaborate rituals. Strict jurisprudence relies on Hanbali fiqh, Islamic law, and direct interpretation of text, often bypassing later scholarly traditions. Moral enforcement emphasizes enforcing Islamic morality, historically through practices like destroying shrines or enforcing dress codes. Wahhabism is often considered a precursor to or a branch of Salafism, sharing its focus on early Islam and rejection of innovations. However, not all Salafists identify as Wahhabis, and some modern Salafists distance themselves from the term due to its association with Saudi politics or extremism. Wahhabis are sometimes called Salafist of the Najd, referring to their Arabian origin, distinguishing them from broader Salafi movements. Salafist, the term Salafist or Salafi refers to a follower of Salafism, an ultra-conservative reformist movement within Sunni Islam that advocates a return to the practices and beliefs of the Salaf al-Salih, pious predecessors, the first three generations of Muslims, roughly 610 to 710 CE. These include the Prophet Muhammad, his companions, Sahaba, their followers, Tabi'un, and the next generation, Tabi al-Tabin. Salafists aim to emulate this era's perceived pure, unadulterated Islam, rejecting later interventions, Bid'ah, and emphasizing strict adherence to the Quran, Sunnah, Prophet's traditions, and a literalist interpretation of Islamic text. Salafist is not monolithic and includes three tendencies. Purist, quietist Salafism focuses on personal piety, education, and avoiding politics. Common in Saudi Arabia, three Salafists prioritizes religious purity and often aligns with state authorities, rejecting rebellion. Scholars like Muhammad ibn al-Uthayim. Political activist Salafism engages in political reform, often criticizing Muslim governments for un-Islamic policies while avoiding violence. They may support democratic processes or social activism. 3. Jihadi Salafism, a militant minority that justifies violence to establish Islamic governance, often linked to groups like Al Qaeda or ISIS. They use Salafist rhetoric but are condemned by other Salafists for extremism and takfir, declaring Muslims apostates. For example, jihadi Salafists like Abu Musab al-Zawahiri fueled sectarian violence in Iraq.
Yeah, but it's Al Zarqawi.
Is al-Qawi, yeah.
Yes, they're very different, from Al Zawahiri.
Yeah, I know I said it wrong, so I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah,
The way it came out.
I thought it was important to make the distinction.
Yes.
So, please go.
Okay. Salafism emerged in the 19th century as a response to Western colonialism and perceived Islamic decline, influenced by scholars like, let me see, scholars like Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, founder of Wahhabism, a Salafist precursor, and later by Rashid Rida and Muhammad Abdu. It gained traction in the 20th century, fueled by Saudi Arabia's global promotion of Wahhabi Salafist teachings through mosques and schools. Estimates suggest 50 to 100 million um, Salafists worldwide, with significant presence in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and diaspora communities. Critics, including many Muslims, view Salafism as rigid, intolerant, or a gateway to extremism, especially due to jihadi Salafist actions. Shia and Sufi groups often faced Salafist criticism for practices deemed un-Islamic. core beliefs and practices, theological foundation. Salafists prioritize Tawhid, God's absolute oneness, opposing practices that they view as polytheistic, shirk, like venerating saints or shrines. They rely heavily on hadith, prophet sayings, and reject speculative theology, kalam. Rejection of innovation. They oppose practices not explicitly endorsed by the Salaf, such as certain Sufi rituals or modern cultural influences, viewing them as deviations. Scriptural literalism. Wait a second, what the heck? The puppies over here. Scriptural literalism. Salafists advocate a direct text-based approach, often bypassing traditional Islamic legal schools. Hanafi Malikis in favor of their own interpretations of primary sources.
Okay.
Te-
I'm finding this very useful.
yes. The, okay. The term takfiri is an Arabic word derived from takfir, which refers to the action of a Muslim declaring another Muslim as apostate. Kafir meaning unbeliever who has abandoned Islam. A takfiri is a Muslim who engages in this practice, accusing fellow Muslims of apostasy, often to justify violence or exclusion against them. This declaration is considered serious in Islamic jurisprudence, as traditional interpretations reserve such judgments for Islamic scholars, ulama, under strict conditions, like denying core tenets of faith. The five pillars. Misuse of takfir is widely viewed as a major sin, with one hadith stating that wrongly declaring a Muslim an unbeliever makes the accuser themselves guilty of minor shirk, associating partners with God. Historically, the term is tied to extremist groups like the 7th century Kharijites, who, using takfir against both Sunni and Shia Muslims, fueling insurrections. In modern context, takfiri ideology is associated with jihadist groups, e.g., ISIS, Al Qaeda, Jia, Boko Haram, who label Muslims, governments, or entire societies as apostates to sanction attacks, often citing thinkers like Sayyid Qutb or Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, during the Algerian Civil War 1991 to 2002. The GIA declared civilians and non-members kafir, justifying massacres. Meanwhile, mainstream Muslim scholars such as Hassan al-Hadiyah and Yusuf al-Qaradawi denounce takfiri practices as un-Islamic and divisive, emphasize that only God can fully judge faith. The term is also politically charged. Shia groups like Iran's regime use takfiri prerogatively against Sunni militants, e.g., labeling all anti-Syrian regime fighters as takfiris, while Sunni extremists apply it to Shias or secular Muslims or platforms like X. It's debated as a divisive label, with some users framing it as a tool to demonize ideological opponents or protect orthodoxy, while others criticize its misuse to stoke sectarianism. In essence, takfiri describes those who weaponize excommunication within Islam, often with violent consequences through its application varies by context and user. Here is the ultimate irony. Some of the most passionate Salafists are not religious. They use the words and concepts to justify violence, such as what is now unfolding in Syria. I believe that the vast majority of Islamic scholars eschew violence as the path forward. I await your pushback.
I think that was a very, Very good post.
Yes, it's very interesting.
Very clarifying. And it helps us, I think, to distinguish various groups inside of the Middle East.
Yes.
I mean, I knew relatively little about these distinctions before.
Same here.
And those distinctions, I think, are very, very important. Let's check our comments.
Okay.
Wayne Sathelben says, Russia, are you now planning marching on the capital, Kiev? Yeah, they are planning on marching on Kiev now, right, and ending the regime. Steve Wolferman says, I studied advanced Spanish at the University of Havana, spent months there. It's lovely, and they are wonderful people. Yeah, I have that impression too. Evelina Ponce's source. Yikes, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the Druze. Laugh out loud. Salafists. Salafists. Okay, Salafists. This is interesting right now. Our indicated shows we have 12,213 people watching this stream. I'm not sure whether to believe that or not. Okay, but there it is. What say you?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's if true. I don't know. It may have somehow distorted our indicators, but
But-
if true, that's wonderful.
Right, and I just that it gets opened up too to a wider audience.
Yes, opened it up to a much wider audience. So hopefully this will help us as we go forward.
Yes.
Uh, okay, yeah. So Salafists, Salafists. I think I spelled it right. So that's what it is, Evelina. So let us now share the screen for our next posts from Larry Johnson. And this one is about the bellicosity of a senior U.S. general. And this is from Sonar 21 also. All three were from Sonar 21. There's a little cartoon there. Keep on rocking in a free world. Hello, old Russia. Oh, that's a caricature of Tony Blinken. That's what that is. And I think the figure on the left uh, is a caricature of the general or the Ukrainians. Anyway, it's the cartoon has the title of Rocking the World in World War III. That's a funny caricature of Tony Blinken. The cartoon is, by Nemo. Anyway, beginning the blog post, the West continues to operate under the delusion that it has the military strength and political support to bully Russia into a ceasefire. Well, that's a flat statement. I'm sure I agree with that particular statement. I think the idea that we have the military strength and political support to bully Russia into a ceasefire is sadly mistaken. I think the Russians are fixated, as they should be, on their goal of fixing the underlying causes of the war as a condition for peace. I think they're correct in thinking they have to insist on that because they don't want to be fighting another war in 5 years or 10 years or 10 years after that. They want the causes of this war to be ended And given their military position, they are certainly right to insist on that. Going on with the article. The latest example comes from General Christopher Donahue, commander of U.S. Army Europe and Africa, who made an incredibly dangerous assertion during a speech at the Association of the U.S. Army's inaugural Land Euro conference in Wiesbaden, Germany last week. Or is it Wiesbaden, Germany? I'm not sure which. Donahue stated that NATO land forces have developed the capability to strike and seize Russia's Kaliningrad exclave, quote, in a time frame that is unheard of, unquote, faster than ever before. He touted NATO advances in rapid land-based operations and emphasized that Kaliningrad, a heavily militarized Russian enclave surrounded by NATO territory, could be neutralized from the ground much more swiftly than previously possible, he said. We can take that down from the ground in a time frame that is unheard of, faster than we've ever been able to do. That's a quote from Donahue. But Donahue's statement, going back to Larry, was not intended to suggest that NATO had imminent plans to launch a first strike. Rather, it was a warning to Russia about the alliance's readiness in the event of further aggression, especially against the Baltic states. Commentators and officials interpret these remarks as reassurance to NATO partners and a signal to Moscow that any attack on NATO would prompt a decisive and rapid response. Regardless of Donahue's intent, says Larry, this is a reckless, dangerous statement in light of his position as the head of the U.S. European Command. While it may have boosted morale among the Lilliputian Baltic nations, the Russians viewed it as a serious threat, and a provocation. I note here the Baltic nations are known as the Baltic Chihuahuas. To Pepe Escobar, who unfailingly refers to them in this manner. Russian authorities responded that any military assault on Kaliningrad would be treated unequivocally as an attack on the Russian Federation itself. Yeah, Kaliningrad is Russian territory. Leonid Slutsky, chair of the Russian Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee, the senior figure who often reflects foreign ministry rhetoric, explicitly stated, quote, an attack on the Kaliningrad region will mean an attack on Russia with all due retaliatory measures stipulated, among other things, by its nuclear doctrine. The American general should consider this before making such declarations. The Parliamentary Defense Committee member called the threats, quote, essentially a declaration of war, unquote. Donahue's remarks, beyond being incredibly stupid, displayed the arrogance and contempt that U.S. political and military leaders have for Russia. I have to comment here, okay, and add. If there are military leaders, other than Donahue, who have similar arrogance and contempt for Russia and its military capabilities, in the face of the reality of Russian performance, in the Ukraine war, I believe that Secretary Hegseth should immediately retire these generals because they are dangerous for the security of the United States. You must have people in charge of the army in Europe and the army in other places too, who recognize the reality of the world. Given the capabilities Russia has shown, okay, in Ukraine, not simply the ground capabilities of the army and its massive attrition of the Ukrainian army, which was an army that proved to be more capable than any other is suspected to be in Europe. And Russia has slowly and deliberately dismantled that armed force. But given Russian capabilities in the air, its missile capabilities, its drone capabilities, above all, its capabilities for integrated warfare, for integrating all these capabilities. And those integration capabilities are likely not capabilities that the U.S. Army has. Unless we have generals who recognize what the reality of capability is on both sides, we are going to be doomed to serious defeats and stupid military activities going forward. Trump has got to fire these generals who know nothing of Russia and nothing of its capabilities. They are dangerous to the United States. And they're dangerous to Trump himself because they will provide nothing but poor advice. Go on with the article. To make matters worse, NATO is conducting or will soon conduct a military exercise that simulates invading Kaliningrad. The Russians have taken notice and do not dismiss this as an idle threat. One retired intelligence officer from Russia reacted by saying, quote, and what would happen to Washington or New York if we deployed our troops in the ocean, for example, including the submarine fleet, and rehearsed strikes on New York and Washington? How would Trump, uh, how would he react to this? Unquote. I think we know the answer to that rhetorical question. Trump would attack. Now the Russia's mass producing the Oreshnik hypersonic missile. Putin has an option other than going to nuclear warfare. The Oreshnik can hit any target in Europe, i.e., it is a hypersonic version of an intermediate range uh, 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 you know, of an intermediate range ballistic missile, except it can be maneuvered while in flight, and a single missile can deliver, multiple warheads. I believe, if I recall correctly, it's 36 warheads, or each one, or 32 warheads. It's a number in that range. The West does not have any defense against this missile, says Larry. I wonder if Donahue understands that. And Larry closes by saying, I had a lengthy discussion with Nima today, who was rocking a killer tropical shirt about Gaza, Iran, and the war, in Ukraine. Nima was rocking a killer tropical shirt, and Larry was rocking one too. And between the two of them, they were very colorful. I can certainly attest to that. And I recommend that video. It was full of interesting things, and also it had a good deal of fun in it besides. So, what did you think of that post, Dee?
I thought it was interesting. Just um, the planning, the planning of things, and how we get told a particular thing, and the U.S. scheming on things.
Yes. Yes. Scheming things. Planning things and scheming things without reference to the Russian capabilities to reply.
Yeah.
Very interesting and very self destructive. Okay, Evelina has asked, "Can you spell it, please?" And I did. And then she spelled it back. And you spell it now correctly, Evelina. That is the correct spelling. She says, "The word fists will help me remember. They sound like trouble." Well, evidently, some of the salafists are trouble, but others are not trouble. And one of the utilities of that article was that it outlined what kinds of salafists are trouble and what kinds are not. That was really the importance of the article. Steve G2, otherwise known as Steve Gonzo, waves and says, PSA, IDF is using modified Chinese drones for genocide. Where are they getting the modified Chinese drones? Evelina says, big trouble. Steve Wolfman says, hey, Steve. Steve Gonzo waves. Evelina says, so soon? Ha ha. Not sure what the so soon refers to, but uh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I think that is fine. Uh, so uh, we evidently have 12,474 watching this particular stream. That is wonderful. Everybody, please share, like, and subscribe if you possibly can. If you can, share, like, and subscribe on Twitter. Then please go over to YouTube to Empowering Democracy and share, like, and subscribe there. That would be very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Now let us move on to our next topic, which is uh, Jeffrey Sachs versus Donald Trump. And here we will share a video.
Just about any car, just about anywhere.
Please excuse the very brief ad.
the fundamental schism of Shia and Sunni, and so much of U.S. policy.
Let me get this back to the beginning. Title: This is Jeffrey Sachs versus Donald Trump. Verbal bloodbath stuns the internet. Jeffrey Sachs, brutal takedown. So,
You protect those you love.
Dramatic. Now, there is no guarantee that we avoid catastrophe because the world's not well led, and the world is in a very unstable situation because of all the things that we've been discussing. Of course, the climate crisis, all of the upheavals in the world economy, even aside from the interventions of leaders choosing wrong things, just the technological upheavals are astounding, and you know that better than I. So this is something quite dramatic. But another thing that's very dramatic is the geopolitical changes that are underway. They are remarkable. They're very dangerous, but on the whole, not bad, actually. What's happening is that a familiar world led, so-called, by the United States and Europe is no longer led by the United States and Europe.
flat statement. Okay, in fact, I do agree with that statement. It's a fundamental premise of the outlook that Jeffrey Sachs is presenting here.
It was presumptuous to be led by the United States and Europe to begin with. It's actually the end of a very long cycle that dates back to 1492 and onward, because it started with a voyage that was a little bit went awry and changed the world fundamentally. And they say that, how do you know that Christopher Columbus was an economist, by the way? He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know where he was when he got there, and it was all on a government grant. So this is par for the course. But the world became a...
So the discovery of America was due to socialism?
Mm-hmm.
Probably just a bad joke, right? Okay, so next.
European-led world with a lot of cruelty and a lot of inequality and a lot of domination, and with a lot of remarkable technological development that came along with it, but that was utilized as a form of power and oppression as well. And the United States dominated the world for about a half a century after 1945. Now we're in a very different world, and the voices of other parts of the world are really important and growing, and that means that in the media and in the political life in the Western world, there's a lot more anxiety actually than there is in China, for example, or in India, where it's not pessimistic. It's not feeling that the world's falling apart. It's feeling that the world is changing in the right direction, actually. And I would say if you look at opinion surveys in Africa, there's a tremendous amount of optimism, actually. Africa is the most optimistic single continent in the world, if you look at opinion surveys.
I haven't looked at surveys, but I'm not surprised to find that that is the result of the opinion surveys. I'm happy to find that that is the result of opinion surveys, because it means that for a change, things are going pretty well on the continent of Africa. And that is a happy thing.
Yes, it is.
Did you know your body might be wasting 82% of the protein you eat after the age of 50?
The world's changing, and it leads to a lot of anxiety, and the anxiety is highest in the United States because nobody likes to be pushed off the perch. But the fact of the matter is the world's becoming a lot more interesting, diverse, interconnected. You're a very diverse group, but not quite diverse enough. Are there any Chinese faces here? No.
We have somebody from Hong Kong.
Okay, good. Hong Kong, we were just there.
Yeah, Jeff is all around the world all the time. Don't know if he travels as much as, Pepe Escobar, but sometimes I think he does.
That's wonderful. And India? Great. Okay. So between the two, you're 40% of the world population, but not exactly 40% of this room. So it's just to say we don't have to have a complete demographic equality.
Shush.
You're a very
Excuse
diverse
me.
group, which is extremely important.
That's okay.
Very important.
I know you weren't talking to Jeff.
The world's even more diverse, if I could put it that way. So we need to strive for that. And viewed in that perspective, my own view is, I'll say a grim statement and then an optimistic statement. If we don't blow things up, which is possible, then
That's the grim statement.
things are going to be okay. And
That's the optimistic statement.
by that, I mean the world that is taking shape will be more equal, more open, actually benefiting from a lot of the breakthroughs in technology. The real worry I have is just disaster in the short term, because my country is the worst led that it's ever been, and our political system has collapsed. So we have one person rule, which is not exactly the way to run a society of 335 million people and $30 trillion of output. But that's what we have for the moment. But if we can avoid the catastrophes, we actually, not just rhetorically and not just optimistically, we really have a lot of solutions in this world for food production, for sustainable energy, for better education and healthcare systems, for all sorts of things that are completely wonderful. They're getting discovered, they're getting developed, you're pioneering many of them. They're not getting undertaken at the scale that they need and the pace that they need by any means, but they could be, because there's no fundamental shortfall of resources or know-how.
That point is particularly important. Our problems are problems of conflicting with each other, of nations seeking to dominate over other nations or over processes. Our problems are human problems. They're not actually resource problems. Very important.
We're not running out of particular minerals so that we can't do this. We're not running out of land so that we're in a struggle for who eats and who doesn't eat. We're not running out of energy, because solar radiation is about 5,000 times our power usage on the planet. So if we deploy solar power, which is now cheaper than any other kind of power, we're not in an energy shortage as well. We're not in a know-how shortage, but we are in a fairness shortage. We're in a niceness shortage. We're in a calmness shortage. We're in a geopolitical crisis. And we are with a lot of instability from all of the upheavals of climate, which are going to get worse for the next 50 years, almost no matter what we do, because underlying our physical reality is a lot of warming built into the system and a lot of shocks that will come from that. That doesn't mean that the impacts necessarily get worse, because things can get buffered, we can become more resilient, we can become adapted, but the climate itself is going to become more dangerous shortly.
Another very, very important point. The climate is going to become a lot more dangerous. We have to learn. We have to adapt. We have to end our conflicts with each other. We have to collaborate so we can adapt as a species, as a people, as a globe.
So this is our state of affairs. Now, what specifically happened yesterday was the U.S. Declared itself outside of the World Trade System. 2 weeks ago, the U.S. declared itself outside of the climate challenge. 3 weeks ago, the U.S. declared itself out of the sustainability challenge. 4 weeks ago, the U.S. declared itself outside of the WHO. All right. Honestly, it doesn't get dumber than this. Really.
I have to say, I entirely agree. It doesn't get dumber than this. I think most of us can now agree that even though the Biden administration, well, I'm not going to say the Biden administration was less dumb, because in many respects it wasn't, less dumb. But we have had serious failure, of leadership. In my view, serious failure, of leadership for many, many administrations now. It's very hard for me to look back on someone who I could say, on balance, but was a really good president. I mean, especially since the 1980s started, we've had a series of people who have made erroneous decisions and put us on the wrong path since Jimmy Carter was defeated, by Ronald Reagan. And Reagan rejected the initiatives, the sustainability initiatives, which were being put forward by the Carter administration, doubled down on fossil fuels and oil and international deals that provided for cheap oil when fossil fuels should have been made more and more expensive because of the real costs to the environment and the climate, that they had going forward.
But the US is 4.1% of the world population. And as I said, the other 95%, I don't see things diminishing in intensity of purpose, but rather increasing. And there are a lot of very good things that are happening, even because of the United States' strangeness of behavior right now. For example,
Okay, I'll go to this in just a second, but I do want to say that the idea that a lot is good is going on is embodied in BRICS and in the outcome of the BRICS conference. Today there was an excellent interview, of Pepe Escobar, by Danny Haifong. I'm going to cover it, on Saturday. I haven't gotten all through it yet, but what I've seen was very valuable because it talked about the kinds of interactions that took place, at the BRICS conference, the kinds of orientations people and nations had as they came together in the conference, and just the hopefulness of the whole thing, the whole dynamism that's been created by BRICS and the coming together of nations for constructive purposes. Very, very impressive. And I intend to cover that on Saturday, among other things.
China and India, which have been at loggerheads for 60 years, for more than that, for almost 80 years, for a complicated reason that the British drew an arbitrary borderline in the Himalayas, and that has meant border dispute and conflict between China and India since India gained independence in 1947 and the People's Republic of China was formed in 1949, and they're still fighting over a line that a guy named McMahon drew arbitrarily in 1880, never having been up to the Himalayas where he drew the line. And there is, by the way, a theorem that I kind of subscribe to, that all problems in the world go back to the British. So that's true in the Middle East, it's true in the Himalayas, it's true in much of the world. Yes, it's true all over Africa. It is actually a very good rule of thumb. It's not quite a proven theorem, but it's a very good rule of thumb.
I have to agree with Jeff Sachs about that. It's amazing how many of the problems in the world were legacies of the British Empire. Just amazing.
It is.
In any event,
Yes.
the Indian and Chinese foreign ministers got together and said, what are we fighting about? We should trade more, we should invest more. And then very positive statements came from Prime Minister Modi and from President Xi. Then last week, 3 other countries that are at loggerheads for no reason in the world, honestly, China, Korea, and Japan. They are divided because the United States says you're on our side and they're the enemy to China and Japan, and to Korea and Japan vis-a-vis China. The 3 got together because they see the U.S. Not such a great protector of their interests, and they said we need to improve relations with each other. This is very, very good. And if you think about Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example, which was defined by the U.S. to be the fundamental schism of Shia and Sunni, and so much of U.S. policy was playing the Sunnis against Shia, Iran, and so forth. They made a rapprochement last year, which China helped to broker in a very wise way. The United States would never have done it and never even have thought about it, but China was very helpful. So truly,
there are 3 simple changes I tell all of my arthritis patients to make. Number 1, you have to start drinking.
I'm not so pessimistic at all. I just see the world changing, and I can understand the pessimism in the newspapers that I happen to read in the U.S., because they're all geared around the idea of the U.S. as number 1. And if you put that aside, I like a world in which China's playing a much larger role, and India's playing a much larger role, and the African Union's playing a much larger role, and Saudi Arabia's playing a much larger role. To me, this is a great world. It's a world of diversity, much better food, much better conversation, much better places to visit, much more fun in conferences and meetings and problem solving and all the rest. But if you just happen to be a U.S. strategist, it looks very grim and dangerous and so forth. So I don't.
So again, a very good statement of facts. Well, not just facts, but point of view by Jeff. If you're a strategist working for the U.S. and for domination of the world by the U.S., situation looks grim. But if you're looking at it from the other side, from the China side, from the Russian side, from the Iran side, and from the side of most of the global South countries, things are developing fast now, and they are very, very hopeful. And they're even hopeful in relation to progress being made in the area of climate change.
Buy into the danger part. I do buy into the danger part for the reasons I said, but I don't buy into the inevitability of crisis. So what I would really like you guys to do is to stay on the networking course and the practical course and the problem solving course. And I want us to help you to do that. And just to be very clear, SDSN Youth is not to empower youth per se. It's to help solve global problems, of which you have a lot of solutions. So that's a little bit different. We have a little more access than you do to some places, being older and gray hair, but you know how to fix our phones and computers a lot better than we do, and what's going on with the latest apps and how to use them and so forth. And that's actually unique knowledge in our world right now. And so it's really important that you're at the table. It's true, you should be at the table for 2 reasons. One, to protect the interests of your generation against 78-year-old US presidents that don't know how to think ahead. So that's true. But I don't think that's the main reason you should be at the table. The main reason you should be at the table is you can help move this agenda forward in a very significant way. So I had good experience when I was young. Luckily thrust into places where I could do something at an early stage of my career. And thank God it worked, because otherwise that would have been the end of it. But in any event, you can do a lot. But I also know we can help you too, because you learn a lot actually along the way as well. Every day I learn something that I say, I cannot believe I didn't know that for the last 50 years of trying to know what I know. And pretty fundamental stuff every day, which is weird to me actually, because by now it should be kind of rote, but it's not rote at all. There's just so much to learn. And I kind of walk around my whole life with a book in my hand, or now with an ebook or on my phone or something, reading every day and learning pretty basic things actually, which is annoying, really annoying, because it should have been done already, but it's not. So all of that is to say we can help you, and I can help you, and I can help you network, and I can help you learn things. So don't presume you know everything, but don't presume that you don't know what you're seeing with your own eyes about things that can be done. So that's really the balance that's extremely important. Now, what's going to happen after 2030? Let me say a few words about that, because you're going to play a big role in that. Obviously, we're not going to achieve what we set out to achieve in 2015, September 25th, 2015, when Pope Francis ushered in the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN. The agenda was pretty optimistic beforehand. At the time, it was very stretched goals. It would have required a lot of capacity and working together to make them happen. Of course, we just didn't get the major powers to work very hard on any of this. The only one that made a major effort, in my view, was China, actually. Europe said a few things at the beginning, but Europe got caught in this Ukraine war, which to my mind was just a disastrous mistake, because the United States doesn't know how to make peace.
Guys, if you suffer from neuropathy, stop drinking cold water now. I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but
and blew the chance after 1991 to help create a true collective security arrangement in Europe. Instead, it expanded NATO. But I don't want to go there. Just to say, the US didn't try, Europe didn't try very much. China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a very big and positive thing. Africa launched the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a very important thing and a very positive development. But the world as a whole, for the major powers, didn't try very hard. So we're reaching, and I don't want to go into it, but my view is the US at the University of North Carolina concocted something called SARS-CoV-2 and made a pandemic. That's another long story. But we just lost a lot of time. So what are we going to do? My hope personally, and this is something we can discuss longer, is that we continue under the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason is it's taken 10 years to have governments understand a bit about how to make such a complicated, multidimensional programming process, because it's not simple to do this, to plan for 17 major objectives, long-term planning, strategy, and so forth. Now, the goals won't stay exactly the same, but I don't want to redo everything to have a new set of goals and a new framework, because honestly, to my mind, it would be, it may be constructive in bringing new voices in, to be sure. So I don't want to rule out deliberations, which will take place, but I don't think we should throw out everything, because it just would be a major loss and time sink. And in our world today, the U.S. will walk away from the table anyway. And
So I find this treatment very valuable in giving us a broad view of where the world stands from, 30,000 feet, and also what's happened in the last 10 years or so, and how we failed.
it just may be very hard to get a framework, other framework. So I'm hoping we continue under this broad rubric, resetting, adding, no doubt, something about artificial intelligence as SDG 18, or repackaging some of the objectives and so on, but to keep this framework to mid-century, because the next period, to my mind, is to 2050, is to mid-century. And that's, in fact, what we need to decarbonize the energy system. It's what we need to transform agriculture. It's what we need to create a workable digital society in which good things rather than bad things happen with these new technologies and so forth. So that's what I think we will be, what I am going to be aiming for in the next few years. This will probably be decided more or less around 2027 or 2028. So there will be a UN process. The next Secretary General will assign a commission, probably. There'll be deliberations. You'll be involved in national level.
One of those crowns I have here fell. I put some like kind of.
Okay, so that's the end of that. I didn't see what I was expecting to see. Before I scheduled this interview for the stream tonight, I shouldn't say interview, but this clip, I didn't have a chance to see the whole thing. And, I didn't see what the headline of the stream had to say. It did not seem to me to be a broad and comprehensive condemnation of Trump, in any kind of detail. I think what it did do probably was, more valuable, than that, and more constructive. But at the same time, based on what Jeff has said, it's hard to resist, the conclusion. Hard to resist the conclusion that since 2015, we have missed many, many opportunities, and that this, in large part, has been due to the leadership of the United States and the attempted capability of our leaders, including Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump again, the incapability of our leaders to address the really major challenges and to get themselves into wars that were really distractions and that put us way behind in meeting the real challenges of the world. In spite of that, there's been a lot of progress in the world, because there's been a lot of progress made by China, a lot of progress made by Russia, and a lot of progress that's been made by the global South. And there are good reasons to, feel optimistic about the future. But I think everything depends on the United States getting aboard with the idea that we have a multipolar world at this point, and we have to cease, we, the United States, have to cease trying to be the hegemon, okay, in the multipolar world. We have to get into the sandbox with other nations and learn how to play constructively and how to collaborate with other nations to try to achieve not only the goals of the United States, but the common goals of humankind in general. Because if we don't do that, then nobody is going to survive. Okay, Evelina Pont says, let's see what I'm missing. I want to move back to the comments. Evelina says, marching on Kiev. And she says, climate will be used as another tool of domination if we continue this way. And Evelina says, love intergenerational, dialogue. So, okay, Dee, any comments on Jeff's presentation?
Yeah, it was very good. He brings forth to the full picture of things, like with Britain and Britain's role, Britain's history, around the world, the US and everywhere else. And what I was thinking about when we were watching that it was just like the US picked up where Britain left off, just that constant conquering and stealing resources. It's not about being, say, the good people in the world. You say diplomacy and peace, um, democracy. It's just this evil of taking what you can wherever you go
Yes,
and not caring about the people there at all.
yes. And not considering or caring about the multidimensional consequences of your actions. And having no ability to anticipate those or to calculate those, and no ability to assess what the likely reactions of others are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you take what's going on now with respect to the tariff wars. All the evidence that's coming in now is that Trump's initiation of the tariff wars and his prosecution of the tariff wars is only hastening the decline of the economy of the United States. It's all the responses from other parties are hurting us and are leading other parties to find ways to collaborate with each other and simply go around and isolate us. And all that is just, we can see the pattern, developing now. Each nation takes action in response to what we're doing, where they're creating bonds with other nations and they're going around us and we are hurt. And Trump's, latest effort to get the Brazilians, who we have a $450 billion a year trade surplus with, okay, at this point. They like to trade with the United States, and they like to buy, our goods. And Trump, in order to benefit a Brazilian politician who tried to set up a dictatorship inside of that country and who was thwarted and who now is facing charges. And for Trump to try to get this guy off the hook because he likes them and in the process threaten our whole trading relationship, with Brazil. I mean, this is idiocy. Uh,
Uh,
I mean, this is not even good for Trump.
no,
It's just idiocy. It's
and people that are guiding him.
yeah, it suggests a failure, okay, and an inability to calculate. I was reading another piece today. I didn't, actually get a chance to read it, but I could see the outlines. The Secretary of Commerce, Lutnick, Howard Lutnick, is evidently Trump's one of his gurus when it comes to the trade war. And he relies on Lutnick for strategy on tariffs. If he relies on Lutnick for that kind of strategy, he should immediately fire Lutnick. The reason why I say that is because certainly Lutnick, if Lutnick has had a part in suggesting all these moves, then what it's showing is the incompetence, okay, of Lutnick as an economist who's capable of analyzing trading interactions and what the consequences of the tariff programs of the Trump administration are likely to be. I mean, they are catastrophic for our economy. I mean, our auto plants are shutting down. I mean, we're having problems getting fuel from Canada. We are breaking our relationships with our closest neighbors, both of which we have very long borders with.
Hmm. Did you hear this today? I just saw this. It says Trump announces a $550 billion investment deal with Japan, saying the U.S. will get 90% of the profits and impose 15% reciprocal tariffs on Japanese exports. Japan will open its market to U.S. cars, trucks, rice, and more, days after Prime Minister Ishiba's coalition lost its upper house majority.
Okay, I didn't see that. I don't trust it.
I don't trust.
For a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons why I do not trust it is our car companies are not going to be here for much longer because their production capabilities are completely integrated with the international system. They need to get components from other countries in order to produce cars here. And they can't have the prices of those components go so high that their cars are uncompetitive. Even if the Japanese market is totally open to US cars, that doesn't mean the US is going to sell cars there because it can't sell cars if it isn't able to produce cars. If it
Right,
isn't able
and
to produce
and
cars
the
at
type
a
of cars
competitive
too,
price. Yes.
because we know how Japanese cars. I mean, just Asian cars in general are top notch.
We can pretty much, yeah, they are top notch, but we can pretty much know as well. If our car companies cannot produce cars here,
Right.
then where is the benefit to us of having the Japanese market open to American cars? Because Chinese cars inside of the Japanese market will still eat uh, the lunch of American cars
Mm-hmm.
because we won't be able to keep up with the supply. If our car companies cannot produce the cars, how are we going to be able to supply these cars to the Japanese?
Exactly. Even if we were able to supply cars to them, the technology, what's our technology like in building the cars?
Our technology in building the cars right now is much inferior to the electric cars that that China, is producing right now. Okay, we know this in various ways, but a Ford executive, a top executive at Ford, was recently able to drive a a Chinese electric car, for a few months. And he was completely laudatory about that car and said we had nothing like it and couldn't
Hmm.
compete with it. Uh, anyway, there are all kinds of articles about the capability of Japanese cars and videos about Japanese cars, Chinese cars. Uh, okay, we know the American manufacturers are not able to compete, with those cars, and tariffs are not going to make our cars any more competitive in foreign markets.
No, not when they have advanced vehicles there. Why would they want to get something that's inferior?
Right. And the American cars won't be more competitive here either if they can't get a hold of the components they need in order to manufacture the cars here. So what is Trump doing? He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't have any comprehensive planning capabilities inside of his administration because he doesn't believe in planning. Anyway, let us get on to the next topic. The next one is the Ukraine sham, and I will share now the screen for that one. It's the George Galloway stream.
Okay.
Let me see. Yeah, let me get that going here. And there's George Galloway now.
Is Scott Ritter. He always makes the most important of any and all of our guests, the most important contribution, precisely because he's been there and done that. Precisely.
See, this is George at his channel, which is known as the mother of all talk shows, or MOATS. Okay, he, of course, is an MP in the British government. He was a Labour MP, but also completely opposed to the trends inside of the Labour Party and a strong supporter of, Jeremy Corbyn and the return, of Jeremy Corbyn, and a strong supporter of the formation of a new party inside of, British politics. But anyway, here we go.
Because he was a Marine Corps intelligence officer, precisely because he was in the arms inspection business, precisely because he was involved in some of the most highly charged geopolitical areas in the world then, in the former Soviet Union, in the post-Saddam Hussein Iraq. He and I were comrades in arms. We both said that the case that had been made for what turned out to be the utter destruction of Iraq and the killing of 1 million of its people and the cascading of fanatic extremism around the world, we both said that this was one of the biggest blunders, one of the biggest crimes of the early 21st century. Little did we know that 25 years nearly on, we'd still having to be talking with each other, almost weekly really, about even bigger blunders, even bigger crimes. But that we must, Scott Ritter. Is always a pleasure, Scott, to have you on the show. I'm very grateful for your time. There's so many enchiladas we could choose, but let's start with, if you will, the NATO proxy war against Russia.
Watch what eggs do to your brain. Take a look at these 2 brain scans. They both.
I was saying to Afshan Ratansi earlier, I don't think Donald Trump's 50-day ultimatum is going to alter the course of Vladimir Putin's presidency. But I'm beginning to suspect that it's going to alter little Volodymyr Zelensky's. What do you think?
I agree. You know, when he first announced it, I was scratching my head as to why 50 days? I mean, it's a arbitrary number. I don't know if my screen's frozen or not, but I'll keep speaking just in case you can hear me.
Yeah. Your voice is good.
It's an arbitrary number. Okay. It's an arbitrary number, 50 days. It's not linked to anything of significance. And when you put it in the context of the other things that he announced in the context of this, arms deliveries that just aren't happening. I mean, people need to understand the 17 batteries, a full complement, according to the president, they're not flowing. The Swiss found out that the Patriots they ordered that were supposed to arrive in 2026, 2027 aren't arriving. Instead, that production line is being diverted to Germany that then will divert Patriots to Ukraine. But that doesn't change the fact that these systems don't get delivered until 2026, 2027. It's currently 2025. And even though I'm a simple Marine and math isn't my forte, I know that 2026 is a year away. So the weapons deliveries are just a sham. There's a pure sham. The sanctions aren't going to happen. I mean, this notion that the president is somehow going to drive fear into the hearts of the Chinese, the Indians, and the Brazilians by threatening sanctions. Brazil already said, if you don't want to trade with us, we won't trade with you. It doesn't matter. China's already said we're doubling down on Russia. And, do you want us to once again pull the plug on rare earth minerals and magnetic materials that will collapse your auto industry? Trump won't do that.
And by the way, if China refuses to give us the rare earth minerals, we won't be able to produce F-35s. We won't be able to produce some of the submarines we produce. We won't be able to. There's so many things in our military relying on those minerals. Now, we have rare earth minerals here. We have a very good supply of them. But we have no capability to refine them and to go through the production process to make them useful for our military products. So if China stops giving us the rare earths that they produce, we're dead in the water in terms of any sustainability of our military framework. I mean, we're just gone. And Trump is jeopardizing this by going along with plans for us to have a war with China. We're not going to be able to fight such a war with China.
No, hell to the no.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. These people, I mean, there was this famous quote from Trump, so angry. The Russians and Ukrainians don't know what the fuck they're doing. Of course, that was kind of bleeped out. We don't bleep here. Okay. But what's obvious to me is that Trump doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. That's something that should be obvious to everyone by now. When it comes to what he's doing in international relations and with trading, he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. When it came to making peace in Ukraine, he didn't know what the fuck he was doing because he didn't understand from the beginning that Putin had a particular framework in mind to treat the causes of the war.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump never broached treating the causes of the war with him. He kept trying to go through this stupid General Kellogg's ceasefire idea to have a frozen conflict, which was the exact opposite of what Putin wanted.
Mm-hmm.
He had no capability at all to create peace because he could not present anything that was beneficial to the Russians. Meanwhile, they had military control of that war. So who didn't know what the fuck they were doing? It's pretty obvious.
And India, if you keep pushing India enough, they are going to slide off the fence on the side that America doesn't want them to slide on, which is BRICS, G20, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So,
by the way, the presidency of BRICS next year is falling to India. And Modi had some very interesting meetings with Lula, in Brazil, just after the next conference, presumably about the handoff of leadership of the BRICS to India for next year.
50 days to do what? Seymour Hersh, a close friend of mine and a man who I deeply respect in terms of his, journalism, has come out and said it's to get rid of Volodymyr Zelensky. And this is the only thing that makes sense. The United States understands that Russia and Ukraine are on totally opposite poles here when it comes to, sides of the equation. And you can't bring them together. You're not going to bomb Vladimir Putin into submission. I mean, the ridiculous campaign statement that Trump made in 2024 that he told Putin to his face that if you go into Kiev, I will bomb the bovine excrement out of Moscow is a straight up lie. That conversation never took place, nor did the conversation with Xi Jinping. But the bottom line is Putin will not budge, and Trump knows this. The problem is Zelensky, and Zelensky has to go. And there's widespread recognition of this reality. And I think Seymour Hersh's reporting, together with other reporting that's appeared in the British press, strongly suggests that Zelensky's on his way out. And this is the only way you move this issue forward. You remove Zelensky. You have to have elections in Ukraine. There has to be a legitimate leader that then can negotiate a deal that will be acceptable to the Russians. I mean, that's the other bottom line is, whoever replaces Zelensky has to know that this is a new game, and there are new rules. The old rules, the old game no longer apply. But I think that's what these 50 days are for. I think Zelensky's on his way out. And again, I don't mean to be too harsh here, but he can either leave the old-fashioned way, which is on an airplane with a suitcase full of money going to one of the many mansions that he's bought with American taxpayer funds over the course of the past decade, or he can die on a cold slab, shirtless with a bullet.
There are, of course, no taxpayer funds that actually pay for federal spending because those funds are destroyed in the process of bank settlement before there is any spending. All the spending the U.S. does is with newly created funds created by the Federal Reserve Bank through adding reserves to the Treasury spending account.
Bullet hole in his head. That's just the way it's going to be. There's no happy ending for Zelensky here.
There needs to be more than one suitcase, I think, unless he's got most of it out already. I'm recalling our former puppet in Afghanistan. I've already forgotten his name, but I will never forget the black bin bags, brim full of paper currency. So very last decade, isn't it? But the coordination of the I don't know if you've read Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island. The black spot was pressed into the palm.
This is the morning gut reset recipe that took me from 198 to 147 in just weeks. It's natural, simple.
This was a black spot moment. The Spectator and the Financial Times, who don't do anything, never say anything that is not approved by the state and the deep state, they handed Zelensky the black spot this weekend. They said that, guess what, he's an authoritarian.
Now, that was a very symbolic way, of putting it. This weekend, the black spot was given to Zelensky. Amazing, amazing. What constituted the black spot? Well, these publications in Britain started to tell the truth about the regime in Ukraine.
What you and I were accused of being Putin apologists for repeatedly pointing out, they said he's corrupt. Ditto, that he is deeply unpopular. Ditto. Everything we said is now appearing in the world's fanciest newspapers. How does that feel to you?
Well, it won't be the first time this has happened. I would hope it would be the last time, but unfortunately, I have a tendency to call things correctly before the mainstream media catches on, and it usually means that bad policies have ensued that aren't fact-driven. But Zelensky, I did a documentary on him, a two-part documentary back in 2023 called Agent Zelensky, where I detailed the fact that this man isn't a democratically chosen savior of the Ukrainian people, but a hand-picked puppet of MI6, the CIA, Ukrainian oligarchs whose sole job was to do what happened, to get Ukraine to serve as a proxy to the West in a conflict with Russia designed to strategically defeat Russia. And in this way, you can say Zelensky has been a great success in terms of facilitating at least 3 years of this effort. But the fact is, the Russian bear isn't going to roll over and play dead. The Russian bear came out of hibernation and has been eating very well, apparently, and it's a very strong bear right now, and it's on the prowl. And nobody's going to be able to put it back into its den. And so Zelensky's time is up. They now have to bring in another figurehead whose job is to facilitate the surrender of Ukraine. And that's what we're talking about here, literally the surrender of Ukraine. This will not be a negotiated settlement. And the West is starting to come to grips with that. You see the panic in NATO right now as they realize that Russia has won this war. And it's not going to end well for NATO in terms of their ambitious endeavor to keep Russia down. The good news is all the ridiculous talk you hear out of the British generals and the Polish generals and the French generals, even now American generals, about Russia wanting to invade NATO. That's just ludicrous. It's stupid. It's ignorant as the day is long. But they need to be saying this and screaming this as people look at Ukraine and say, hey, we're losing. And they can't say, well, it's just a fake the whole time. It's just a proxy war. Don't worry about it. They now have to say, in order to preserve their political credibility, yes, those evil Russians are winning there. So now we need to build up our arsenals to be able to confront the Russians. I've never seen so much bellicose posturing by British officers in a long time. I mean, it's up there with the ridiculous posturing of the German officers and the Polish officers, three armies that simply can't fight today, especially the British army, who, I mean, can barely fill up a soccer stadium with troops. And apparently, based on what I've seen, no offense, George, but many of these troops are not battle fit. And yet the generals are out there just talking as if they're ready to go to war with Russia. It's not only embarrassing, but it's...
Rub garlic on your feet to clear toenail fungus? Nope.
What's the fastest way to get relief for toenail fungus?
It's dangerous.
It is dangerous and slightly absurd, slightly Gilbert and Sullivan. It is a paper army. We have 74,000 in all three armed forces, by the way. But that includes hairdressers and clerks and medical staffs and probably diversity officers and all the rest of that paraphernalia. We probably couldn't field more than 40,000 people across three services that would be ready for action in a war against Russia with millions of men. And 3 years.
Russia now has 1.5 million men in the armed forces. Britain can field maybe 40,000. By the way, we would have a tough time in fielding, let's say, 400,000. I don't think we could do that. We have a grand total of 440,000, okay, inside of the army. But when you get down to the combat-ready forces, it isn't clear that we can do much more than 120 to 140,000. The Russians just injected 160,000 more troops into a new offensive that they're starting inside of Ukraine to wind things up.
Battle hardened and with a military industrial complex that knocks everybody else together. Military industrial complex working like clockwork. No doubt the 40,000 that we have are skilled and brave officers and men. I'm not in any way seeking to disparage them, but they are being encouraged by their political masters to get into, a swinging dick contest with people with much, much larger dicks than them. And that's what's dangerous about it.
George, that's just perfect. But yeah, I mean, this is basically, the beta cook showing up at the porn star convention thinking they got what it takes. They don't. It's ridiculous. Just to show you the level of ridiculous. No, drone warfare is being redefined as we speak in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. The Russians now, they allowed an Italian journalist to go through their production facility in Tatarstan and outside of Kazan, where they're in the process of producing over 1,000 of these Shahed-style drones a day. 1,000 a day. They're already firing 400, 500, 600, 700 a day. There's talk that they're going to get it up to 2,000 a day. This is Russia in full swing. And when I say in full swing, understand that they're not really in full swing because the Russian economy is still very much dominated by civilian industry. The military has been mobilized to a certain extent, but this is not a wartime footing. But in this, mobilized state, they're outproducing the West in 3 months what the entire NATO produces in a year. Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, has come out with this ridiculous directive for drone dominance. He's directing that the United States will have drone dominance, as if by saying this, it shall happen. And at the same time, the United States has unveiled its copy, literally a copy of the Shahed drone, the geranium that the Russians are mass producing, called Lucas. It's got one of those ridiculous American acronyms. But he's saying this proves that we're on par with the Russians. Lucas is still in the developmental stage. It hasn't achieved mass production. It never will achieve anything remotely resembling this because the Russians are producing something that costs $20,000 each. Lucas is going to cost close to $1 million, $1.5 million per copy.
If you are sleeping in a position like this, you are wrecking your body and your breathing. Obstructive sleep apnea happens when your upper airway.
This shows you why we will never match the Russians, because we can't do what the Russians do. And we're not even talking about the manpower right now. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Are the Russians supermen? Absolutely not. They bleed just like we do. When bullets hit them, they die, they get wounded, they cry out for mommy. They do the whole thing. War is as hell. But what the Russians have on us is that for 3 years, they've learned how to kill. There's a great book written by a trilogy. Rick Atkinson wrote it about the U.S. Army in World War II. And when he gets to the end of the first book, An Army at Dawn, he talks about getting ready to go into Sicily. He said the soldiers that were green at Kasserine Pass that the Germans beat, he said they had learned that the only way they're going to go home is through Berlin. And the only way they're going to get to Berlin is by killing Germans. And they became very good at killing Germans. The Russians right now are very good at killing Ukrainians, and they'll be very good at killing anybody who gets in front of them. NATO has no relevant combat experience. And the first engagement between Russian forces and NATO forces, if God forbid it ever happens, will end in an absolute disaster for the NATO forces, which is why people like General Christopher Donahue, the current commander of European forces, who just hosted in Wiesbaden a conference called I think it's Euro Land. It's about the future war. He threatened to take out the Kaliningrad exclave. He said, we can do this instantly. No, Chris, you can't. If you even attack Kaliningrad, understand it doesn't exist in isolation. There's the rest of Russia out there with all of their missiles, like the Oreshnik. You will die screaming like a scared girl in your bunker when you realize the missiles are incoming and you have no air defense to protect you, and you made a grave mistake. Anybody who thinks that they can fight and defeat the Russians on the field of battle today is making a grave mistake. But moreover, we should never even be thinking about that. The Russians are not posturing themselves for war. They are posturing themselves for peace, to live in peace, to live in prosperity. Go to Russia, visit Russia. I know you were in Russia recently, and I know you know what I'm about to say is true. These are people who are in love with living life, and they're living a good, high-quality life. And all they ask is to be able to continue to live that life free of the interference of outside powers who have, for the past century and a half, wanted nothing more than to bring Russia down.
Amen.
For the last century and a half, the motivation of the British foreign policy, I mean, we're talking about since the Crimean War of 1854. Okay. Since then, the British foreign services have always had a grand interest in bringing Russia down. The collaboration in World War II was only a temporary collaboration. Before Churchill saw the light, he was seriously contemplating trying to let the Soviet Union and the Nazis fight things out. He would have continued to do that except for the Nazi conquest of France. Anyway, that's actually beside, the point, but there is an important point here, and that is the British Foreign Services, the intelligence services, MI6, has a continual foreign policy goal of overturning Russia and making it subject to the collective West. You got to continue to recognize that.
All that. Speaking of Russia, Scott, it turns out, although again, you and I already knew this, but now the whole country knows it, that Russia was indeed a hoax. And moreover, it is a hoax that is entirely the responsibility of your former president, Barack Obama, because it wasn't the intelligence community that said that Putin put Trump into the White House. In fact, they said the precise opposite. It was Obama and his henchmen and women who perpetrated a fraud, I say a coup against the idea of America, against the American Republic itself, exponentially bigger than January 6th, that farcical affair.
There are two types of people who should avoid taking gabapentin for neuropathy. Anyone who wants to keep both legs healthy.
The consequences of that could have been World War III, because if Russia had indeed interfered in your politics to the extent that they installed an agent of theirs in the White House, well, could scarcely get more serious than that. Do you think this has got legs? Is there any chance of prosecution?
The information that Tulsi Gabbard has brought forward is damning. I don't know if it's sufficient for an indictment, and I don't know if it's sufficient for a successful prosecution. On the surface, it should lead to, preparation for an indictment. But you have to also be careful of the fact that prosecution may be difficult because you have to prove things, and for instance, I think one of the most difficult hurdles they're going to have to overcome is what Brennan, the CIA director, did in bringing out a human source, a defector inside Russia, inside the presidential administration, who apparently was a double agent, and that the Russians were feeding information back just to play the United States and humiliate the United States, which they've succeeded in doing, by the way. Again, this is totally a self-inflicted wound. But I don't know if when you go to trial, this kind of information may not be able to be brought forward, because then you get into all the things the CIA never wants to talk about. And then other evidence that would be, condemning, will be protected by executive privilege and things like that. So I think Tulsi's playing a strong hand up front to create the public, to shape public perception about the criminal actions of Obama and his henchmen. But if it comes time to actually successfully prosecute, which I dream about, because I truly believe that no person is above the law, especially a president who betrays the trust and confidence of the American people by committing a legitimate act of treason, which is what Obama has done. I'd love to see them held accountable, but we're talking about three of the most high-placed deep state actors possible: Obama, Brennan, Comey, the CIA, FBI, and the president. And it's going to be very hard to put forward a cognizable case that can actually succeed in prosecution.
What they're talking about now is the Obama administration suppressing the intelligence information that Russia was not involved in trying to influence the 2016 campaign. Hillary Clinton's campaign, of course, was trying to make the case that Trump was colluding with Putin in order to get elected. This has been debunked in many ways. It was, debunked early, but no one knew until Tulsi recently released the information that intelligence reports existed at that time showing the Russians had nothing to do with influencing the campaign, weren't trying to do it, and didn't have the capability to do it even if they wanted to. There were intelligence reports about this, and the Obama administration conspired to prevent those reports from getting to the public, so people would know the counter narrative to what the Clinton campaign was trying to put out. And so Scott, and George, are characterizing this, as treason. I don't know that I would go that far, because treason has a very specific sort of definition, and it relates to the betrayal of the United States in the context of war. And we don't have that context here. Of course, it was risky. It might have caused a war, but the fact is that it did not. So I don't know if treason is the appropriate charge here, but it was certainly very shady doings, and it, certainly was an illegitimate attempt to direct the 2016 campaign towards Hillary Clinton. It was, of course, unsuccessful.
Because of the classification of the information that is at stake here.
The public now know, though, that the entire first presidential term of Donald Trump was deliberately wrecked, imperiling the peace of the world.
This incredible mold remover gel can restore your bathroom and your tiles to their original shine in less than 15 minutes.
This incredible product eliminates stubborn mold and mildew in seconds.
And that the British were up to their necks in it. We're not called perfidious Albion for nothing. the role of MI6 in all of these stories that we've discussed tonight and others that we've discussed on other occasions. It seems to me we're two, to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, we're two countries united by a common deep state.
Yeah, George, this breaks my heart because, as you know, when I was United Nations weapons inspector, I worked very closely with the British government.
Very, very important point. Two countries that united by a common deep state. But there's another point that's missing here for the time being, and that is that there is the deep state of a third country that's involved in this, and that is united with the other two deep states, and that is the Mossad of Israel. And I think that's very important to keep in mind.
Government. I mean, there were periods of time where I would make weekly flights to London, the red eye, to just fly in the morning, have meetings in Whitehall, have meetings throughout London, and then fly home at night to be back in time to file paperwork at the end of the business day. Every time I went to Iraq, I traveled through London, and every time I returned from Iraq, I traveled through London because I had a close, intimate relationship with the British government, with the British intelligence community, and I had deep respect for the professionals that I worked with. But that England no longer exists. And you know, in the England that I believed in was you, George. You hosted me in Parliament. You showed me Parliament. You walked side by side with me, you know, in a million-man march that went to Hyde Park where we spoke out against the war. You showed me that the British people are capable of having a heart and doing the right thing. And that's the England, the United Kingdom, the Great Britain that I fell in love with, but it no longer exists.
I don't know if I would say that, because right now there's an uprising in England that's going on that evidently has ended the government of Keir Starmer and has manifested a rebellion against both the Labour and the Conservative parties, and it seems about to bring Nigel Farage into power. I don't know what that's going to mean for Britain because he's a very, very strange character, and I wouldn't be too optimistic about that. But there is Jeremy Corbyn in the background who is launching a new party, and I have high hopes for that.
I'm not saying you don't exist. Clearly you do. But your government is not the friend of the United States, not by any stretch of the imagination. And we're at a point right now in American-British relations where we need to be calling a spade a spade. You are not our friend. In fact, you are our enemy. You facilitated active treason against the sitting president of the United States. Under some circumstances, that would be a casus belli, which means we have every right to blow you off the face of the earth. And you're lucky I'm not the president, because I'll tell you what, you interfere with American democracy to that degree, you will pay a heavy price, as you should. Not you, George. You're my friend, and not the British people. And that's why we'll never do this. But your government is the absolute enemy of not just the United States, but all of humanity. The thing it's a shame to say, because you're the birthplace of the Magna Carta. You're the birthplace of some of the, you know, the greatest intellectual minds about democracy and human rights. And what you've become, what your nation has become under its current leadership, is an embarrassment, not just to England, but to all of mankind.
This is the quickest way to clear out stuck poop.
The #1 food for regular BM.
Sorry about these ads. I can't really do anything about them. Okay, but anyway, on that last point, change is coming to the UK now. We will hope that it will be very profound, but it remains to be seen. The deep state will still be there. It remains to be seen whether Nigel Farage can dismantle the deep state. It remains to be seen whether Farage's government can last for any decent period of time to effect the changes that need to be brought to the UK. One thing I can say with respect to Farage, I don't think he has any understanding of the power of the UK as a currency sovereign to do things to improve the domestic situation of the UK and to improve the trading situation of the UK as well. I don't know if Farage can do that because I think his ideology is too primitive to do that. So I don't have a lot of high hopes, but perhaps he can bring a transition to a saner form of politics in the UK that can bring Jeremy Corbyn to power finally. Anyway, it's time to look at our comments again. And see what we have. Okay, Mr. Wonderful said, hello, everyone. Hello, comrades. Evelyn is selling rice to Japan. How insulting, laugh out loud. Must be one of Trump's bad jokes. Actually, I think we've been selling rice to Japan for some time now. Correct. And America can't even make a competitive car like Koenigsegg makes. That's the Swedish car maker who makes very, very fine cars, but in very limited amounts, which is far more economical and practical than an all electric vehicle, because they are hybrids running on 3 cylinders. Yeah, Koenigsegg has a very interesting car. But a lot of innovations are going on in the auto industry. Unfortunately, those innovations are not occurring here in the United States. They're occurring in Japan, they're occurring in China, they're, in this case, we're occurring in Sweden, but not occurring here in the United States. Blaine McKinnon says Trump just does what he's told. There are so many people telling him, different things, that he always does what he's told by somebody, but just who it is and whether it has any coherence is highly debatable. Steve G2 says, former Jeffrey Epstein lawyer Roy Black reported dead inside his home. Uh-oh. How old was he? Sherry Wise says, hi, everyone. Hi, Sherry. Great to see you. Evelina Pond says, not a dialogue, but an invitation by Professor Sachs to the younger generation. Steve G2 waves. Mr. Wonderful says, I know you can get rid of them. Use Brave browser. If the ad blocker from the browser itself does not work, add uBlack Origin browser add-on for the browser and update it. Should help, just saying. But thank you, Mr. Wonderful. I'll look into that browser, Brave browser. Okay, let's get to our last piece of the evening, unless you have a comment that you want to make about that the video from George and Scott that we just went through with.
No, that's okay. We can move on.
Okay. Steve G2 says 80 years old. I'm sorry, what is 80 years old? Who is 80 years old?
Roy Black.
Oh, Roy Black was 80 years old. Okay, thank you, Steve G2.
Yeah, there's a suspicion too.
Is there suspicion that he was killed?
Yes, because there's all of a sudden, as everything with Epstein is, everybody's talking and talking and talking about it, and he was Epstein's lawyer.
Even it says, really, U.S. been selling rice to Japan? It's their staple food. Yeah, it is their staple food, but I'm pretty sure the U.S. has been selling rice to Japan for some time. Anyway, let us get on with the final video, which is Scott Ritter and Glenn Deason interviewing him. And Glenn is a professor at the University of Southeastern Norway or Southwestern Norway? I forget. But he's a professor in Norway. He just comes across as a very nice guy, very unassuming guy, but very analytical, actually very, very good. And he has Scott on here, and Scott goes crazy. I don't know what happened here right now, but I will fix it. Oh, I just got. One thing I love about Scott is he always lays it on the line. There's no subtlety. He just comes right out in front with what he thinks.
It's not up on the screen yet.
Well, thank you.
Oh, 2026, 2027. The last time I checked, it's July 2025. And I may be a dumb Marine and math ain't my forte, but I can tell you right off the bat that July 2025, it's a long way to go to get to 2026. And I can also tell you that last night the Russians fired 450 drones into Ukraine. Not the largest number. They've sent almost twice that many on nights, and they're gearing up production, according to Italian newspapers that toured the production facility in Tatarstan. 1,000 drones a day are being produced. If we're producing 1,000 drones a day, that means you're preparing to launch 1,000 drones a day.
Scott had made that point in the earlier video, from George Galloway also. That's just an awesome number and not something the Iranians can continue to live through. I mean, their armed forces just are not going to be able to survive that sort of attack. That doesn't include the missiles the Russians will be able to throw at them as well, or the additional troops the Russians are going to be able to throw at them. I'll be very surprised if the Ukrainian resistance lasts for another month.
And so I'm just looking at this saying, what the hell was Donald Trump smoking when he said this? And the point is, it makes no sense. It's a policy doomed to fail. Now you take a look at the economic aspect of this. It's not so much the sanctions against Russia. Russia could care less. In fact, when this was announced, the Russian stock market apparently increased value 2.7% because the Russians thrive under sanctions. And so there you go. But this promises secondary sanctions against China, India, Brazil, and other nations that are consuming Russian oil under the premise that if you can stop them from buying Russian oil, the Russians don't have the money to continue to fund their war, etc. Well, China's already committed to doubling down on Russia, meaning China knows full well that what's going on in Ukraine, there before the grace of God will happen to Taiwan if they don't stop it right now in Ukraine. So this conflict is a Chinese conflict. They're all in to make sure Russia prevails. And to give you a hint of where the Chinese will stand if we are dumb enough to put these sanctions on China, Europe passed their 18th tranche of sanctions. And the Chinese have come back and said that because apparently 3 Chinese companies were included in these sanctions. The Chinese said, if you really want to commit suicide, go ahead, but we will punch back and we pump at it hard. We will knock your ass out. Reconsider what you're doing. And Europe will, because they have no choice, because they don't hold any cards here, nor does.
There's another important point. Okay, where China's involved in any of these sanctions, the Chinese are going to reply very, very harshly, to the Europeans, and the Europeans are in a far weaker position than the Chinese. They want good trading relations with China and Europe. All the European nations do. They want to be able to sell into Europe, into China. Their industry is flagging. They want to sell stuff to China. They have to be very careful. The sanctions will fail.
The United States hold any cards with China. If you recall, back in April, the president put sanctions on China. I can't remember the number, the percentage. It doesn't matter because it didn't happen. He had to immediately back down and extend the sanctions for 90 days. Now they're extended through August, I guess. They never happened. The Chinese
supposedly it's supposed to start on the 1st of August, which is what, in 10 days? I don't think they're going to go through with it.
Responded by cutting off all deliveries of rare earth minerals and magnetic materials to the United States, destroying the American automobile manufacturing base.
And not just the automobile manufacturing base, but manufacturing of arms here as well.
Because you can't produce a car without access to these minerals.
It won't be possible for Raytheon or other organizations like that to operate.
We don't have any alternative source. The Ukrainian rare earth mineral deal is on paper. It's not real. Congo, the 3 guys that Trump sent to negotiate this with the Congolese leadership ended up fleeing for their lives. Where else can you get it? Myanmar. That's all going to China. Where else can you get rare earth minerals? I guess you're stuck. Afghanistan, Chinese got that one too. So the Chinese own us, and if we impose these sanctions, this mistake that was made, which was destroying the American automobile industry, only was recently rectified, I guess, in June, where they finally negotiated some sort of agreement. China should just pull the plug. They don't need us. They'll pull the plug and they'll collapse. China's not going to play this game. It's stupid. It's the most predictable outcome. Brazil has said, if you don't want to trade with us, we don't want to trade with you. Therefore, it doesn't matter what you do. We'll just cut you off. And India, at some point in time, India is going to have to get off the fence. And I don't believe that India will sacrifice its sovereignty for the insane unpredictability of the Trump administration when they are part of BRICS, part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, part of the G20. And, that's
not just part, but once again, the presidency of BRICS this coming year is falling to the Indians. They will be central to BRICS this coming year, and they'll be under tremendous pressure to move forward with BRICS.
It's the direction of their economic future. So,
hello, Mark Barden here from Sandy Hook Promise. On December 14th, 2012,
I personally don't believe these sanctions will ever be implemented. I believe that this is a gimmick that was, I believe Lindsey Graham would like to see them implemented. According to him, it'll be opening up a can of whoop ass on Putin. He's been watching one too many examples of the water boy. Lindsey Graham is so irrelevant, such a non-player, such a non-entity. He just provides political cover, because now it's the Senate asking for these sanctions. Trump has agreed to it, but he's waited 50 days. So what is Trump waiting for? Because I don't believe these weapons deliveries will have any impact and the sanctions won't have any impact. I think the key to this comes in with Seymour Hersh's most recent Substack article, where he says that the Trump administration is actively moving to get Volodymyr Zelensky removed from office. This is the only thing a 50-day pause makes sense of. This is a chance for regime change in Ukraine, to have Zelensky replaced with somebody. Sy believes it's going to be Zelensky, the former commander. I don't think Zelensky is a qualified candidate. I don't think if he is picked, he'll be a very temporary candidate, because the Russians will not accept him. This is a man who took a selfie with Stepan Bandera's photograph in the back, posing next to an Azov Nazi. So, no. I think the direction we're heading now is the elimination of the Zelensky government and the implementation of elections in Ukraine that will be geared towards producing a government sympathetic to the Russian demands. And from this, you will be able to navigate towards an eventual ceasefire and conflict termination. And I think this is the path that Trump is taking. He can't say it because it's a loss of face. But I think, Trump will say, we will agree to the peace that the Ukrainian government will agree to. But right now, you can't agree to a peace the Ukrainian government agrees to, because Zelensky's government won't agree to peace. The solution is to get rid of Zelensky's government. And I think that's what this 50-day pause is designed to do.
So Scott is suggesting that Trump does know what he's doing with respect to Ukraine. Okay, at this point, that he has a plan, and the plan is to get rid of the Zelensky government and to help to create a government that will be able to negotiate an end to the war, with the Russians. If this is true, I'll have to take back what I said about Trump just recently.
Because Trump said he was disappointed in Putin, and because he didn't want to make a deal. But it is unclear what deal he's referring to, though, because in the beginning of his administration, Hegseth seemingly recognized that peace would require neutrality to be restored in Ukraine, and also to make some territorial concessions, as the Russians would say, to take into account for the changes on the reality on the ground. But Trump referred to as ceasefire. Is this essentially, is he pushing the same deal as Starmer, Macron, or Merz, or what deal are they trying to sell to the Russians? Is it just an unconditional ceasefire?
Look, Trump doesn't know what deal he wants, because he doesn't understand anything about Ukraine. Neither does Hegseth, neither does Rubio, neither does Kellogg, neither does anybody. Trump, you have to evaluate the Trump position not by what we normally would use as the benchmark for evaluating policy, but how it impacts Donald Trump politically, personally. He's a narcissist, an egomaniac, and his policies are ego-driven. What he's looking for here is a political victory. He wants it to be said that he, Donald Trump, facilitated into this conflict. He wants it done in a manner where he comes out as the conquering hero. But even Hegseth, from the start, and I believe you and I have had this conversation before, territorial concessions being made on Russia's behalf. Well, wait a minute. There's no concession to be given to Russia. Russia owns the territory in question. Who is the United States to concede anything to Russia? Russia's taken it by force, and they will continue to take it by force. Russia's not looking for concessions. Russia owns that territory. It belongs to Russia, and Russia will kill every Ukrainian who decides to stay on that territory. And the United States and Europe can't stop it. That's what Pete Hegseth doesn't understand. That's what Keith Kellogg doesn't understand. That's what Donald Trump doesn't understand. You can no sooner ask Russia to negotiate away the right bank of Kherson than you could ask the United States to negotiate away Southern California. And I know there's some MAGA Republicans out there who would be very happy if Southern California was negotiated away. But the bottom line is the territorial integrity of the United States is, is set in stone. And so is the territorial integrity of the Russian Federation. And as things stand, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk are part of the Russian Federation. Moreover,
from the Russian point of view, they're part of the Russian Federation. One of the problems is we don't recognize that yet. We better recognize it soon.
Hegseth needs to understand that the United States started this war, not Russia. Indeed, it was the Trump administration's first term that created the conditions for this current conflict. And that the Trump administration's efforts to arm the Ukrainian military, if you remember, in 2015, we started training Ukrainian soldiers in Western Ukrainian bases. By 2016-17, during the Trump administration, we were talking about training 500 Ukrainians every 55 days to send them east to kill Russians in the Donbass. That was our purpose for doing this, and that's under Trump. So
why has no one told you that memory loss can be reversed without expensive medications? I'm 66 years old, but my memory feels as...
The fact is we're the ones who caused this war. We're the ones who created this war. We're not going to be the ones who get to dictate the outcome. I mean, why would the Russians listen to us? This is like asking the arsonist how to fight the fire he started, and asking, the arsonist gets put in jail. America is an arsonist. We're a geopolitical arsonist, and we've set fire to Ukraine, and the Russians are the firefighters, and they're going to put the fire out on their terms. And they want to put the fire out in a way that the fire doesn't reignite, restart. That means they have to address the root cause of this conflict. These are things the United States doesn't want to address, nor are we capable of addressing, because frankly speaking, we don't comprehend it. There's not too many people in Washington, D.C. that can speak effectively and accurately.
It's strange to say, but what Scott is saying is that we don't comprehend that our foreign policy has been the root cause of this conflict. And of course, I won't say we won't ever comprehend that, but until we do comprehend that, we're not going to have peace with the Russians, because we have to comprehend it. And we have to recognize that we have to stop being the root cause of the conflict. And if we do recognize that, we'll be in a position then to recognize that we live in a multipolar world, and we have to play nice in that multipolar world.
And responsibly on the complexities of the Ukrainian question. In order to do that, you have to understand the history properly, etc. We have Keith Kellogg, who doesn't know a damn thing about Ukraine other than what the Western Ukrainian nationalists have told him. We have Marco Rubio, who simply colors every thought coming out of his head with "I hate Russia," and we have Pete Hegseth, who no disrespect intended, but he's dumber than a box of bricks, especially when it comes to Russia. So who is
no disrespect intended
advising our president, my president, not your president, my president, our president, when we speak of the world being held hostage to the most powerful position in the world, the American presidency. Unfortunately for Ukraine, for Europe, for the world, because of the incompetence of the United States, I think you're going to see this conflict continue until Russia physically destroys Ukraine and until Europe physically destroys itself.
Well, it seems
that's really a dark view at this point, because Scott is implicitly saying he thinks the Europeans will continue this silly attempt to rearm, continue to provoke up Russia, and then they're going to start getting a bunch of Oreshniks in the middle of their major cities. And that will be what he means by Europe destroying itself.
If now we see the Russians are winning, and not if we are seeing this, and this means that also, given that Russia sees this as an existential threat, they're not going to be able to, do any compromises on the key issues. So a key problem has been I guess the unwillingness of Zelensky to make any significant concessions. So for this reason, the Russians reached a conclusion, I think, a long time ago, that it wouldn't be possible to get a peace agreement with Zelensky in power. With these new reports, do you see it as the United States or the Trump administration at least reaching the same conclusion, that it's simply not possible with Zelensky, or is the thought about replacing Zelensky with solution is simply about Zelensky losing a lot of support among his own people, and not just the public, but there seems to be some cracks emerging in the political elites as well. In other words, is this regime change of Zelensky to pursue a peace, or just to refresh or restore some of the Ukrainian government?
Guys, if you suffer from neuropathy, stop drinking cold water now. I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but
Well, you know, the Russian problem runs deeper than just Zelensky. What they say is any solution, any agreement has to be signed by a legitimate authority. And Zelensky is not that legitimate authority. So that's the only problem Zelensky poses, is his elimination. Once he's eliminated, you can replace him with a...
Okay, he's no longer such an authority because he cut out the last elections. There were supposed to be elections, I guess about a year ago now, and he just said, well, we cannot hold elections, but I'm still going to continue as president, of Ukraine. So according to the Ukrainian constitution, he's not, a legitimate president. And according to the Russians, he's not such a president, because he doesn't have the authority of, having won his re-election. So that's a simple point, but from the Russian point of view, it's very important, because they think that from the standpoint of international law, he's not empowered, to negotiate a peace agreement, and they need to deal with someone who's legally empowered from Ukraine, to negotiate a peace agreement.
Legitimate authority, but the legitimate authority, all they're good for is signing a deal dictated by Russia. The legitimate authority isn't going to have, if you remove Zelensky and replace him with somebody else, they're not going to be able to come in and say, well, my name's not Zelensky, therefore you must give us this, that, and the other thing. Ukraine gets nothing. Ukraine has lost this war. Europe gets nothing. There will be no concessions made. Getting rid of Zelensky opens the door toward creating a government capable of legally accepting the terms of surrender dictated by Russia. That's it.
And of course, what they will get, in Ukraine, if they accept the terms offered by the Russians, are the ending of the killing of so many, of the Ukrainians, so many of the young people, of Ukraine. Scott estimates that they've had about, in fatalities, maybe 1.3 million to 1.5 million. Colonel McGregor estimates they've lost 1.5 to 1.7 million in fatalities, an utterly huge amount.
And for that reason, I don't pay too much attention to the crumbling of Ukraine's governance from the standpoint of, that shows dissent, people breaking free, wanting this, that, wanting peace. Nobody in the Ukrainian government wants peace. They want a continuation of the corruption that has allowed them to buy sports cars, mansions, etc., to move resources offshore. Watch how quick they all flee when the wall comes tumbling down. There won't be any of the Ukrainian officials that are currently there remaining behind to face the music. They will be gone. And this is the resistance you're seeing because of Zelensky right now. The Ukrainian elite, political and economic elite, are saying that he is costing them access to that which enriched them. That is the resources of the West pouring in. And that's why they dislike Zelensky, not because of any posture or anything. It's purely a results-based analysis. Are we able to continue to enrich ourselves with the funding brought in? Is Zelensky able to go out and rattle the tin can and get people to put money in the tin can that we can then steal and enrich ourselves? Or is the money drying up? Therefore, we need somebody new, a Zelensky, to come in. From their perspective, Zelensky would be the darling of the West, and the money would just be triple, because now the West would say, "Oh my gosh, Zelensky, he's the man." But the Russians don't care.
This is why I canceled my DoorDash subscription and switched to Cookunity. After months spending way too much on DoorDash, I got bored of.
They're not going to say, "Oh, well, because the West now likes Zelensky, we have to concede." The Russians will just continue the war until Zelensky likewise leaves. The entire Ukrainian government is corrupt, and Russia's not going to deal with any of them. They will not be part of a post-conflict Ukraine, because if you're talking about the root cause of this conflict, the Ukrainian ruling elite is the root cause. They will not be allowed to stay. They will not be allowed to remain. They may not even be allowed to reside. They may be arrested, put in camps, put on trial, or compelled to flee. But no, they won't be part of any post-Ukraine. The more I listen to the Russians, the more I look at how the Russians are structuring themselves right now to try and, there's an interesting book. It's a work of fiction, but it's called Armageddon, written by Leon Uris. And it's a book about the Berlin crisis at the end of World War II. But the way the book starts is it talks about the problems of military government and how the United States had to prepare for military government, for post-conflict Germany. And we were preparing for military government midway through the war, And I think the Russians are at that stage right now. While they haven't defeated the Ukrainians, they haven't eliminated the government. The Russians are preparing for post-conflict reality, and they will have a government ready to move in. And that's what the world needs to start preparing for, is the inevitability of Russia dictating what the future of Ukraine will look like from the top to the bottom.
What do you see being the role of the Europeans in all of this? Because, again, part of Trump's deal was America will sell weapons to the Europeans, and the Europeans will then be allowed to donate this to Ukraine to fight Russia. But the Europeans seem somewhat divided. The Italians, and I think the French as well, aren't too interested in spending the money they don't really have. I mean, they're both going bankrupt fairly soon. On weapons, but Germany and the United Kingdom, they still seem somewhat, still gung-ho on war. Indeed, the Politico recently had an article where Merz and Starmer was meeting, and apparently they found a common cause in war, that this is the only thing seemingly going for them. Now, the British aren't really that big of a surprise. They always tend to position themselves as the most anti-Russian force, I think partly to make themselves a reliable major partner of the United States in Europe. But for the Germans, this is something very different than what we only saw a few years ago. Do you think that they would take this further if they now see Ukraine beginning to collapse? So, would they spend money they don't have for these weapons America don't have, or would they actually enter the war themselves?
Oh, you can't enter a war unless you're capable of entering a war. As I've said, Germany can't deploy 4,000 troops to Lithuania to get their Lithuania Nazi brigade up and running. How do we expect them to suddenly form the 4th Panzer Army, the 3rd Panzer Army, the 6th Army, the 9th Army, the 8th Army, to replicate the forces of the Third Reich? They don't have the resources to do that. You have Merz and his tongue, but what's it backed with? Even Rheinmetall, the military industrial complex, how many tanks can they produce? Where will they get the steel? Where will they get the money? Germany is bankrupt. They don't have Audi just, I mean, it fascinating video, but
Germany doesn't produce its own currency. It is a currency user. Their currency, okay, is the euro currency. That currency is produced by the European Central Bank. If Germany needs extra money, I've already taken. Okay, if Germany needs extra money in order to spend on arms, it has to get that money by taxing its people further. According to the agreements of the EU, it can only run deficits 3% per year. So, it's already running deficits at that level. It simply cannot afford to increase the spending unless it decides to get out of the EU. It may decide to do that. The English did that. Maybe some of the other countries will realize that if they want to fight wars and if they want to retain their political support at the same time, they'll have to keep their social safety nets, and they will have to be able to finance their deficits, and they won't be able to do that unless they can create their own currency.
they, they're not selling cars, so they destroy cars that they produce because they're not able to sell them. But there's not a functioning economy right now in Germany. It's a collapsing economy. And you have a situation where Europe is starting to say, in order to free up money for this irresponsible military spending, we have to start cutting social programs and, touching the things that made Europe a great place to live. The idea of, the French and their 4-day work week. I mean, who wouldn't want a 4-day work week? The Germans and their paid vacations. I mean, they were the envy of the world. Now that's going away. Healthcare is.
Yeah, sometimes I look at the number of hours worked for OECD nations. I forget the exact number for Germany, but it was something in the neighborhood of 1,350 hours worked for a laborer per year, between 1,350 and 1,400 hours. The comparable value for Greek laborers was something like 1,850 hours per year, and that's about the same level, as American workers. In other words, if you take into account the holidays and vacations, the number of hours worked is about 1,850 or 1,810 or something like that. But the German workers only had something like 1,350 to 1,400 hours worked. The French workers, had a little more, but it was nice to be a German worker compared to, being a Greek worker or an American worker. Very nice indeed.
Going away. Education, everything's going away. Europe is collapsing into third world status because of the insanity of these warmongers that are trying to rewrite history. I mean, if I hear Mertz one more time say, we got to, we won't make the same mistake. Well, what mistake did you make, Mertz? Because he's talking about we're going to do it right this time. Do what right?
Introducing Aspire at Huntwell West, a new community of stunning single-family homes offering a blend of rural.
Invade Russia the right way? You won't make the same mistake. That means you want to do something that you already did, and the implication is you want to basically repeat what happened in the Second World War. Please repeat it, because I will love the outcome. Then we'll have T-90 tanks on the plinths outside of the Reichstag, as opposed to T-34-85s. These are two of the most grossly irresponsible leaders Europe has ever had. I mean, I don't know why. And to be frank, I know it's not you, but Norwegians. And you have your own history of quislings. And you know what it was like to live under Nazi occupation.
and you understand the irresponsibility of those Norwegians who sided with Nazi Germany and fought alongside Nazi Germany. And I hope that your society continues to hate them and revile them. I can't imagine anybody in Norway saying, "Oh, we wish for the good old days of Quisling." And yet, that's what's happening in Germany right now. Where are the Norwegian voices to say no? No. Where are the European voices? Where are the Dutch voices? Where are the Belgian voices? Where are the French voices? Where is all of Europe that was occupied by the Third Reich? Why do they believe that an expansive Germany would simply turn its eyes east? Where are the Poles? Because to get to Russia, you got to go through Poland. And yet this is what Mertz is talking about, literally talking about. How do you get those German tankers who say they want to shoot to kill Russians? No, you don't, guys. The Russians will kill you. They did it before. I don't know why the Germans forgot that. And the Bundeswehr is not the Wehrmacht. Okay, the Bundeswehr is full of beer-drinking, schnitzel-eating fat men who don't know how to fight, have never done a day's worth of exercise in their life. And if they went to war against the hardened killers that currently populate the Russian military, they'll be slaughtered in a week.
There goes Scott.
This is fantasy. It angers me because I can't believe we're sitting here in a day and age where we're watching it happen again, watching the Germans try to become the Fourth Reich. And nobody's saying anything. The silence of the world as this happens, except the Russians, but apparently the Russians aren't allowed to say anything because they're evil and they're bad. The good news is I don't think Mertz is going to last the year. I think the German economy is such that he will have a vote of no confidence and that there will be an election and he'll be tossed out on his ear. And I think Starmer is going to face the same music. He's one of the most widely unpopular leaders in England, and as he continues to spout this madness, it'll be rejected. And the other good news is, I mean, the economic collapse of Europe is tragic for the European people, but maybe good for the world. Because I don't know how many more times the British have to go through this cycle of elections till they realize that their nuclear deterrence is unaffordable. And maybe we can get the British nuclear deterrence taken care of, where they just self-demobilize because they can't afford their new submarines and their Trident missiles and all this. And look at the French with their economic collapse. Wouldn't it be nice if the French likewise came to the determination that they can't afford these submarines? And now we're starting to look at a potential of real nuclear nonproliferation, because if you eliminate the French and the British independent nuclear deterrence, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is because they just had the Northwoods Declaration where France and England came together and said, no, our nuclear umbrella is going to cover all of Europe. No, it shouldn't cover Europe because you're not responsible enough, because you two morons are talking about sending conventional forces into Ukraine to fight the Russians and trigger a war that will then inevitably lead to a nuclear exchange. Britain and France can't.
It may not lead to a nuclear exchange because the Russians may destroy the capital cities of other nations of Europe through use of the Oreshnik along the way. And then the Europeans will give up without actually using their nuclear weapons. Maybe. Of course, the possibility exists they'll retaliate, with nuclear weapons. And then, then all hell breaks loose.
Be trusted with nuclear weapons. So the collapse of Europe could lead to the unilateral disarmament, and that frees up the United States and Russia now to negotiate responsibly. Because in the history of our arms control negotiations, we've always been hindered by the NATO nuclear deterrent and the fact that we refuse to put the British and French nuclear arsenals on the table when talking about numbers. But no, Europe, what you said, what about Europe? Your question was, what about Europe? Europe doesn't matter. Europe doesn't count. Europe is nothing, one giant nothing burger. Europe is going to rot. Europe is collapsing. Europe will go through political upheaval. And, the Russians will sit there and say, we didn't want this. Russia doesn't want that. Why would Russia want instability on its western borders? What Russia wanted was stability. What Russia wanted was responsible trading partners. What Russia wanted was, a peaceful coexistence. But that's not what Europe has offered. That's not what Europe is offering. And Europe as it's currently configured will never offer that, because Europe as it's currently configured can only survive by creating the specter of a Russian threat that doesn't exist. We just had the newly appointed commander.
When he talks about Europe is currently configured, what he's talking about, is NATO. If Europe were to disband NATO, then maybe peace, would come to Europe and to the whole of Europe.
European forces, General Christopher Donahue, at a Euro-land war conference in Wiesbaden, talked about how quickly NATO forces can take over Kaliningrad.
What if your eyes could regenerate themselves?
Since the late 2000s, the AREDS2 eye vitamin has been considered the gold.
Sorry about all these.
NATO forces won't get 1 kilometer into Kaliningrad before nuclear weapons pop off all over NATO. That's what he doesn't seem to understand, is that Kaliningrad doesn't exist in isolation, that it's tied into the defenses of the Russian Federation. And the last time I checked the Russian Constitution, Kaliningrad is considered to be a constitutional part of the Russian Federation. And if NATO were to invade it, you would be creating an existential threat to the physical integrity of the Russian Federation, and NATO and Europe would disappear from the face of the earth in a nuclear holocaust. That's what Christopher Donahue doesn't understand. Apparently nobody in Europe understands this as well. Europe needs to grow up, wake up, or just die already. Go away. I'm personally tired of Europe, fed up with Europe. I imagine the Russians are as well. And America will become fed up with Europe because you don't bring anything to the table. Not a damn thing. You don't bring a functioning economy. You don't bring national pride. My God, the Germans, we're sitting here talking about the Germans as if the Fourth Reich is something in pipeline, and they still won't look us in the face and say, shame on you. I mean, I don't know if you saw Tucker Carlson's conversation with the Bild. Yeah, the Germans should just roll over and fade away. They're embarrassing. The total lack of, they posture tough against Russia, but when push comes to shove, they are the most compliant group of beta cucks I've ever met in my life. And I apologize for injecting that thought into this conversation, but that pretty much defines Germany and much of Europe today.
Well, it's remarkable how quickly Europe became so insignificant politically, economically, militarily. And I think this is a great fear of Europe, that America's leaving and there's no, then Europe's relevance will go with it. And well, when you spoke now, I thought about J.D. Vance when he told Europeans, we don't need vassals, we need allies. It's kind of sad when your masters in Washington have to tell you to stop being vassals, but it is a sad decline. Yeah, so European, my main concern is, given this whole time over the past few years now, you could see that the military division of Europe, that this would lead to the irrelevance, that it would lead to economic decline, and yet the people who pursued this path, they kind of monopolized on patriotism, that if you care about our countries, this is the path you take. And as I said, now look at Germany again with a failing economy. Talks now openly banning the main opposition party, backing genocide in Gaza, and the only foreign policy now appears to be war on Russia, which is, and as you pointed out, I don't think the other Europeans would respond that favorably once this, if this German army ever gets off its feet. But,
the irony is, if you go back and look at Germany in the 1930s during the Weimar Republic and into transition, they could put strong German men in the field to do calisthenics, and you looked at it and you went, that's military stock right there. Those boys are fit. How many Germans today put the flag of their country on their shoulder with pride? How many Germans run around and say, I am a German. That flag is my national symbol. I will die for that flag. Or have the Germans bought into this Euro rot, where they're part of a greater European continuity, and they're ashamed of defining themselves as Germans? And I think that's a problem with a lot of Europe right now, is that they've bought into this European Union stuff, which stands for nothing, and they've forgotten who they are. And ultimately, in order to have a viable military, you have to have a group of physically fit, and I want to re-emphasize that, physically fit young men who are ready to die for their country. Not conscripts. Everybody's talking about how they're going to use conscription to bring their military up. Conscription in a modern war is a recipe for disaster. First of all, conscripts will never be able to handle the modern equipment of war effectively. Second, their motivation. They're conscripted. That means they didn't want to join the military to begin with. And Europe doesn't have this. This is why you have shrinking militaries. Nobody wants to join. And it's expensive to have an all-volunteer force. And that's one of the reasons why I've stopped worrying about Germany a long time ago. I'm angry. I'm furious. But I don't fear Germany mobilizing a new Wehrmacht because I don't think Germany has enough men.
That may be so from a cognitive standpoint when Scott stops to think about it. But the way he was talking before, it certainly seemed like he had a fear of Germany attempting to become the Fourth Reich. He reacted so strongly to it. It seems that his strong reaction to that idea belies is now saying that he doesn't really think, there's much chance of that.
They barely are able to put out the financial incentives to get enough people to volunteer to serve in the Lithuanian brigade, because constitutionally Germany can't deploy conscript forces over, outside of Germany beyond, that against their will. So you can't. It's not like the United States. You join the military and they go, "Well, we're sending you off to Afghanistan." Well, you can't do that. Well, you have to volunteer in Germany. And they're barely able to get enough. They haven't even gotten enough yet for this Lithuanian brigade. So how in God's name do they think they're going to motivate 500,000 German boys?
An important day is coming for every American with money in the markets, and it'll be here sooner than you think.
To join the military. And are there 500,000 physically fit German boys? I'm talking about people that wake up in the morning, play sports, can put 90 pounds on their back, hike 25 miles, in function. Modern societies don't produce warriors anymore. We produce chair-bound people who, have bad circulation because they spend all day in a desk playing computer games. You put them in a gym, they can't lift the bar, let alone put 120 pounds on their back and go. This is the sad fact that faces Europe and the United States. I mean, we have our own obesity problems. One of the, when we take a look at our own population, our population is not capable of producing warriors in sufficient numbers right now. And it's a problem for an all-volunteer force of the size of the United States, because we had to make so many concessions in order to make recruitment goals that now when you take a look at a U.S. military formation on the parade deck or exercising, it's a joke. It's like coming to a fat camp, and a bunch of overweight people desperately trying to get in shape. Only the Marine Corps and a handful of Army units maintain the combat physical capacity. The European military today, they don't have this physical fitness, this capability. War is about more than technology. War at the end of the day, and we see this in Ukraine, comes down to hardened men on the ground, willing to eat mud, breathe cordite, and shove a bayonet down the throat of the bad guy. And unless you're able to function in that environment, you're going to lose the next war. And Europe right now, they can't. It's the European, collectively, Europe's militaries are universally not prepared to wage high intensity conflict of the sort that's being fought in Ukraine today.
And I fear you're correct that this war will not just destroy Ukraine. I think it will destroy Europe, at least in its current form. But I think future generations will look back at 2014 and the years after, and the foolishness of continuing this, even when the consequences became known, and we kept looking the other way. Anyways, thank you so much for your time. I hope you can come back again soon.
Okay, thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Yeah. Scott foresees not just the end of Ukraine or victory to Russians, but he foresees the end of Europe possibly also, because of the foolishness of, so Okay, so there's a lot of incredible stuff, okay, that's going on here from start to finish, okay, of this stream. What we're seeing a deep state which continues to push the idea, of the hegemony of the United States. And that is opposed really virtually by the rest of the world, except for the European allies of the United States. Okay. And the European allies of the United States are in a weak position from the economic, okay, and the military standpoint. I think the United States is in a stronger position because it's a currency sovereign, and it can basically spends what it wants for whatever is for sale here in the domestic economy. Meanwhile, however, what Trump is doing is he's making less and less available here in our domestic economy for dollars by disrupting trading relationships with other countries around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So in doing that, he's weakening the United States as he moves forward. And he's weakening the European states also because he's forcing the European states at this point, or trying to force them anyway, to increase their military spending, when in their current arrangements they can't possibly increase their military spending because they only have room for 3% of GDP as deficits each year. So he's putting the European countries and their regimes, into a bind. And that's going to result in political revolutions in all of the European countries. The commitment to war in Ukraine is doing that by itself. And the United States is exacerbating the situation by now trying to make, the Europeans pay for everything. So meanwhile, we're looking at a general collapse of the West and a general rise of the Russians and the Chinese and all of their allies, and the general rise of the BRICS. And when on Saturday we start examining, what was going on at the BRICS conference, and also some of the, other videos and articles, available now, we will see that, as Jeffrey Sachs had it, that the future is very bright for the global South nations, okay, and for the BRICS nations, and for what they're doing, okay, in coming together. And the longer we stay out of that by not acceding to the multipolar world and not joining the economic trends that are so constructive, the more we isolate ourselves, the more we hesitate our own decline and collapse as a society, as an economy, and as a military force. Okay, as well.
Definitely. And yeah, we're collapsing ourselves. Israel's collapsing. It's no one's thinking. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, no one seems to be thinking of the future when Trump contemplates being drawn into a war, in order to defend Israel. He's getting warnings, I know, from certain people who are telling him, if we get into a war with Iran, we will lose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we will very, very heavily lose. And such a loss is only going to hasten our decline. And it's not going to save the Israelis, because
No.
one more cycle of missile attacks from the Iranians, let's say another 12-day war, that's going to mean the end of Israel as we know it, because Israel will not have a viable economy and society left at the end of that particular process. and they will no longer have the capability to prosecute the genocide, to go through with its plans to annex the country, okay, of Lebanon. I mean, they can forget about all that stuff.
Right, and we'll be kicked out. We'll be kicked out of the Middle East.
We'll be kicked out of the Middle East. If we fight a war with Iran, we will be kicked out of the Middle East because we won't have the viability to stay there. We won't even be able to have the naval force to stay there because those aircraft carriers are going to be sunk.
Mm-hmm.
Those task forces are going to be sunk because the missiles and the drones, it can sink them. And Iran is very strong, much stronger than we are when it comes to missiles, okay, and drones. And those naval assets are sitting ducks. Everything we have is sitting ducks except for our submarines. If we keep them inside the Middle East, they're going to be destroyed. If we keep our air bases, okay, inside the Middle East, in West Asia, they're going to be destroyed. If we have wars in the area, in other words, our might, our might is really on paper. It doesn't exist given the nature of modern war, okay, at this point. And it's not backed by a manufacturing capability that can sustain the armed forces because we farmed out the kind of manufacturing capability that would lead to our being able to sustain ourselves for any substantial time, okay, in war. Our war efforts would be unsustainable because the manufacturing capability doesn't exist to support them, okay, at this point. We can create that manufacturing capability again over time through subsidizing certain industries, but it will take years. That's something that can be done in the short run. In the short run, we have to fall in line, with the new world and a new order of things. And it's not the rules-based order. It's a multipolar world. It's international law. It's giving more power to the United Nations. It's recognizing the BRICS, joining the economic trends that BRICS, okay, is starting, collaborating, okay, with other nations. That is what we have to do, okay, for the future. So I'm going to look at the last few comments, and then I think that will bring the program to an end for tonight. I was very gratified, of course, by all the attendance. My indicator is showing 12,930 people actually watching. Unfortunately, it's not showing very much in the way of likes. I'd like to see a lot more likes and shares and subscribes, of course. But still, the viewing totals are extremely encouraging. Steve G2 said, oh yeah, 80 years old, I read that already. And Mr. Wonderful says, at Joseph Firestone, Empowering Democracy, I think you're right. Statements made by Scott was spot on, especially about Zelensky having two choices, the old-fashioned way or dead. Yeah. Evelina points out these and reminds me of Dima. So zen. Yeah, Glenn is a very, very quiet man. He has recently written what everybody claims to be a very good book. I haven't had the time to read it yet, but it's about the balance of power in Europe and the balance of power changing, in the polar world. And I think Glenn has the kind of personality where he would have created a very thorough book in this respect, full of facts and very compelling, in its arguments. He's a quiet guy, but I think he's an effective guy. So, Dee, we've come to the end of another stream. Thank you so much for backing me up in this stream.
Oh, you're welcome. And I just want to make an announcement that Wednesday evening, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, is the book launch of Madeline Hoffman's book, A Fleeting Glance. And we are going to be airing that like Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, that will be great. And you'll be airing that, okay, at Around the World with Dee and Friends, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the YT channel for that. Okay, and Dee will also be streaming to Facebook and to Twitter
Yes.
at the same time. Okay, are you going to be promoting that on Twitter as well?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so then there will be a lot of attendance at that.
Yes, and we have special guests on the show, so you'd have to stop in to see who the guests are.
Okay, cool.
So it's going to be a really good show.
Okay, great. Okay, everybody, thank you very much again for coming. I will be back on Saturday, and I will have more on BRICS and on what is happening in West Asia and what is happening, what is happening in Ukraine as well. I'll be keeping tabs, okay, on all of that. Thank you very much for coming. And Mr. Wonderful says, another great show, Joe. Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Wonderful, for coming.
Yes, and please, everybody, please like, share, and subscribe.
Yes, please do like, share, and subscribe. And please, if you're so inclined, go to my Patreon account, which is right up there on the screen, patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I could certainly use some donations to help me going forward.
And also on X to please follow Joe Firestone.
Yes. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you very much, Kay, for reminding me and everyone else to follow me on Twitter.
Yes, I always forget that too.
I do also.
Okay, good night, Bonnie.
Good night. Okay, good night, Dee.
Yes, and good night, everyone.
Okay. I'm going to end the stream now.